Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. On today's episode, I have a guest that I've been trying to get on my channel forever. He's a person that does not do interviews. As a matter of fact, there's very little on the internet about him. And I'm talking about producer, engineer, mixer Brendan O'Brien. Brendan has worked with bands like Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, Soundgarden, Korn, King's X, Bruce Springsteen, AC/DC, you name it. And he's done all these songs that you know incredibly well. I mean, look at all these songs. And that's just a small fraction of them. As a matter of fact, Brendan not only is a great engineer and mixer and producer, but he also played the guitar solo on the Black Crowes' Hard to Handle. In addition to that, he engineered and mixed the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magik, and he plays keyboards on that record. I'm really excited about this, and it's a long interview, so take it in sections. Without further ado, here's my interview with the great Brendan O'Brien. Brendan, welcome.
Thanks, Rick.
So you don't do interviews very often. As a matter of fact, you don't do interviews pretty much ever.
I think you're probably overestimating the volume of interview requests coming at me, but not really much, no.
So many people that I know that are massive fans of yours that are actually professional musicians have always wondered all these things about you. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, well, we should just start with your background. Okay. When did you start playing music?
As early as I can remember, probably, really 6, 7, 8 years old, and it became something I was became somewhat obsessed with, guitar in particular, by the time I was probably 10.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
I had an older brother, and he was into music and way into it and played guitar, and so I just kind of I was a pest. I took everything. I would play his guitars constantly. I'd rifle through his records while he wasn't home, and older sisters who both loved music. So my house was very of the time. Okay. And, I just absorbed all of it. I kind of stayed under the radar. I was the fourth of five. And my mom and my dad both were very musical. And okay. So I don't know, I took to it. I think I had a knack for it early on. And if you have a knack for it, and then if you're, for me, I was young and hard to relate to people and stuff like that, like everybody is when you're young. I just, spent my afternoons and evenings and every chance I got playing guitar. Yeah.
Did you have lessons ever?
I did. I took lessons early on. Wallace Reed Music in Tucker, right?
Nice.
Here. Yeah. Actually, Wallace Reed used to own Wallace Reed. I think he still might have a place in Gwinnett County, but I'm not sure. He was a very tolerant man of me. I would go there with my buddies, and I'm like 11 years old, 12 years old, and we would just be pest all day, and let me see that guitar. What's that one? But the guitar teachers said, "Hey, this kid can play," and
right.
And so I took lessons from one of the teachers, and it was going well. And then another guy named Joe Carpenter, who was a teacher later. My mom said, "I need you." When I turned about 13 or 14, she was like, "Look, you need to learn songs we know, pretty much. You need to learn music theory." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, whatever, sure." So I took from this guy, Joe Carpenter, and he taught me, very specific, classical music, and tried to teach me how to read. I had no patience for that whatsoever.
Okay.
But he understood very quickly that I understood music, and again had a knack for it, and I didn't mind doing the work. And his version of me doing the work is I did all my homework and come back. What I would really do is I would ignore it completely until a half hour or an hour before I've got to go to the lesson, and just study it real quick and learn it, and relative minors, circle of fifths, all that kind of stuff. And my mind was like, what? This is amazing. But again, they were very patient with me. I think when I look back, I think of all the grown-ups who were patient with me, that I hope I would be as patient with just an absolute pest as they were with me.
But you were able to figure out songs by ear, right? You taught yourself.
Yeah, that's something I've always had. I've had ear, so that's above all else. I could hear things, and it's what they would say, a gift and a curse. I can pick out the songs I need to know.
Yep.
And the songs I don't want to know, I know those too. So yeah.
Brendan, what was the first guitar solo that you learned?
I mean, probably it was a version of Down by the River.
Okay.
Because it was simple.
Yeah.
And my brother had a band, and the guy played this version of it that he would play, and he played it the same way every time. And I would hear them, and I'd watch him, and I just, at like, I don't know, 10, 11, I completely mimicked that, and I had it down note for note. And, you know, around that time, I was listening to, of course, Led Zeppelin they'd just come, you know, was out a little bit, and Mountain. I didn't realize, actually, Leslie West was one of those guitar players when I was a kid. My brother was way into Mountain. I didn't realize this. I learned those guitar bits because they were easy.
Yeah.
And I could figure it out. And this is something, I like this. What I didn't realize was I was learning how to play economically and in between the singing, because Leslie West was a master guitar player.
Yes.
I didn't know that's what I was learning, but that's, you know, I spent probably a whole summer playing Mountain songs.
Nice.
You know, and that sort of informed, you know, how you kind of, you know, when you're 11 or 12, that stays with you.
Okay, so who would be some other guitar influences?
Of that time?
Yeah.
You know, Jimmy Page, Dwayne Allman. I learned Fillmore East backwards, forwards. I learned Zeppelin 1 and 2. And then when 3 came out, again, I might have been in 6th grade when that came out.
Yeah.
Everybody loved it. It was really cool because it had the crazy album cover, you know, and
Yes.
But there was a lot of, I know that Zeppelin was huge. They were instantly huge, actually from their second album, but they only came out 8 or 9 months after the first album.
Right.
But there's a lot of talk about, you know, all this acoustic folk music, and we don't love it and whatever. I was like, oh no, I'm way into this. And then I learned to start playing acoustic guitar. That was exciting. You know, Jimmy Page. And Since I've Been Loving You, I learned that when I could pretty much play that when I was probably 12. But again, that's all I did. That's all that mattered to me.
When did you start playing in bands?
Soon after.
Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting. Having 3 grown daughters who are awesome, who are amazing, and having helped raise 3 grown daughters, we were very careful how, I'm sure you have kids too, and you know, you're careful how they get out of the house and when they're younger and they're teenagers and whatever. My mom thought it was a good idea, and it made sense at the time that I should be playing with people of my level, not my age. So she started letting me go out and hang out with musicians who are in their 20s. And by the time I'm in 8th grade, I'm playing in bands with guys who are seniors and out of high school already. And that part of it worked. But at age 13, I didn't have a growth spurt probably until I was, 18. I was a little guy, had long hair, looked like a little girl playing guitar. And it was, at the time, that's just all I knew. And so I started playing in bands with, older guys at that point, and all the stuff that comes with it, drinking and smoking weed way too early and all that stuff. So, and that part is the part you look back and go, what? But that's what happened. Yeah.
You had told me when we spoke on the phone that you dropped out of high school.
I did.
Speaking of Tucker High School. What grade would that have been?
Well, which time? I was a junior. Again, I was playing in band, and at that time, when I was 15, I joined a band in Atlanta. We were fairly successful cover band, and there were guys who were, in their early to mid 20s, great singer, and so we could play Zeppelin stuff.
Okay.
And we had a great drummer. And he was from Tucker. A matter of fact, the only reason I got in the band, his name is Mark Krause. So the only reason I got in the band was because these guys wanted him bad. He was great. He could play Bonham and all that. So he was great. And he goes, only if you take my friend. And they're like, your friend's like, 15, but he can play. Come on. And I've played him. Okay, he's in. So he was 2 or 3 years older than me, but Mark. But the other guys were older. And I remember I had my 16th birthday. And the guys in the band threw me a little 16th before the gig at Underground Atlanta at a place called the Front Page. We'd already been playing there a year. And the owners and everybody was very happy, very nice to us, and they loved us because we brought people. This is at a time when you could bring people, and then nobody checked IDs, and the drinking age was 18, and it was packed, and we did very well. And this is when we kind of started, and we were kind of getting going. And the club owner, she was like, wait a minute. And somebody put 16 on my birthday on my. She goes, how old are you? 18. Right. She goes, listen, you got to get a work permit. So my mom got me I had to go get a work permit to play there, and C.W. Shaw's, which was also a big club around the time. We played there, and the guy found out that I was young, and he said, look, you got to get a work permit here too.
I didn't even know that was a thing, Brendan.
You could. I would go to these clubs later to go sit in with friends or whatever.
Late. Right.
Well, but I had to be careful because sometimes the door guy knew I wasn't 18 and he wouldn't let me in.
So how did that lead to you dropping out of school?
Well, I played all the time. I was constantly playing music. I was constantly on the road. I didn't give a shit about school. Looking back, it would have been so easy, just go to school, man.
Just finish it up.
Everybody, mine especially, would have been much easier if I'd done that. But I was stupid. And so when you're 15 and 16 trying to fit in with older people and smoking cigarettes, smoking weed, drinking, all that stuff, school is just, and you're exposed to a lot of stuff, out in the world, the school just didn't seem like, and I just didn't, it wasn't that I was difficult, I just didn't go. And so, yeah. So
when did you get in the Georgia Satellites? Where was the transition to that? And had you started doing any recording at the time?
I was never in the Georgia Satellites.
Okay.
I was in they were called the Satellites.
The Satellites, okay.
And, but I'd moved to New York around 81 or 2 for a couple of years, and that was... Yeah.
Interesting. And why did you move to New York?
This band I'd worked with before.
Yeah.
I played with Satellites before. The bass player who was in the Satellites got kicked out at some point. He's a great guy, Keith Christopher. He plays at Leonard Skinner now.
Okay.
When I was a kid, that was like the guy.
Okay.
And he's probably one of the best bass players I've ever been around. But he was as much of a mess as I was. We were both just, he was older than me, but that's how it was. But he was in this band, and I was friends with all the guys in the band. Because friend, and we used to all jam around and stuff. And he got kicked out one day because something went on with the drummer's girl. I don't know what happened. Something went on, and it just happens. And Rick Richards, I think he called me. It was either him or Dan called me and said, "We got a gig tomorrow. Can you come just sit in and fill in?" And I didn't play bass really. I could play bass, but they knew I was the only guy that would be able to come and know all the songs and not have to practice or anything. So I instantly just boom sat in, and I did that for about a year, maybe a little longer, and then moved to New York. So a lot of those songs, and then when I came back from New York and I got back with them again, that fell apart, and I started doing other stuff, but then they became the Georgia Satellites after that. But then New York was in the middle. I lived there about almost 2 years, so yeah.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. Believe it or not, 57% of the people that watch here regularly are not subscribed. So I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button now. This will help me get even more of my dream guests in the future. Thank you. When did you actually go into a studio and start working?
It's interesting. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, one of my best friends had an actual job.
Okay.
And he was a very responsible guy. Uh-huh. And he's my brother-in-law now. His name's Joe Perry. We call him the real Joe Perry. But he would save his money, very responsible, and he bought a TAC Tascam 80-8.
Okay.
8-track tape and a little Tascam mixer and the reverb unit, and had a little studio, and I, again, talk about it, just a pest. I was over there making him nuts. But we did a lot of that stuff together. We learned how to do this stuff together. He and I learned how to kind of use that stuff. Didn't know, no training whatsoever.
Right.
None. It was after we left there that he ended up having to move out of that studio that I even figured out what a compressor was. I didn't know what that stuff did, but I just knew that at one point I figured out you have two guitars playing the same thing. That sounds incredible. I don't know how, but we're going to do that. And so I was always interested, always into it. I always liked the idea that the back of the record you'd see it would say produced by, and I don't even know what that meant, but that seemed really cool to me. And I had no interest in being the main guy. My dream really was, as a kid, to be like the world's best second fiddle, like a really great number 2 guy. I wanted to be the guy kind of doing all the work and playing and whatever. And somewhere around, 84, 83, I got a job at a studio as an assistant because I played a couple sessions, and the engineer there was great.
Okay.
I'll say his name. His name was Tommy Cooper. He's a great guy.
Okay.
And it was very impressive how good, like, you would go in those days, so that's the difference between now and then. Now everybody can do it, which is the great news. That's also the bad news, is that everybody can do it.
But they can't all do it well, though, Brendan.
But everybody's still doing it.
Okay, so Tommy Cooper, what studio would this have
This is
been?
Web 4, which was like a real studio in the
Okay.
day. It was like a real big...
And right in town here?
Yeah, Ed C. was
Ed C., yeah.
pretty big producer after that,
Yeah.
around that time. But I did a session there with him and some people, and we were all impressed. Like, this stuff sounds great.
Okay.
Like, we'd go in the studios and it would sound like, why doesn't that sound like Led Zeppelin, or why doesn't it sound like Tom Petty or whatever? Why does it sound like this? And I was just like, how are you doing this? What's going on here? What's happening here? What is that thing? Again, a pest. And at some point, he moved up, and they had a spot for an assistant engineer. And and at that time, I didn't want to. It was a crazy time in life. It seemed like a good thing to do. So I went and worked there for a while. He trained me, taught me pretty much most of what I know about engineering.
Okay, so this is on tape too, so people are clear. What kind of console did they have in the place? Do you remember?
It was a Sphere.
Sphere, those were great consoles.
Yeah, I have some of those still. Yeah, it was a Sphere.
Yeah.
Sphere something. I forget what it was called.
Yeah.
Huge, enormous.
Yeah.
It was like sort of like in the same vein of a Neve or a Trident. That kind of big, analog, enormous.
Yes.
And Studer, and it was like a real legit place. And
Yeah.
He taught me how to cut tape and what happens here and how to kind of be professional. And he was very adamant about, listen, when you have a producer in here,
Yep.
you've got to make this stuff sound good right away.
Right.
Because if it doesn't, they're not worried about anybody else. You're the one that's not working. If it sounds good right away, they're going to stay and they're going to be happy. They're not going to hassle you. So
the faster you can get tones and things like that.
yeah, if you can't get a rough mix going by one pass through with headphones on, you're screwing up very badly.
Okay.
He was very much into, in those days we had, one 24-track machine, and we could use probably 23 of them because the edge tracks and whatever,
Yeah.
So you had to kind of manage your tracks because you had 3 or 4 things on the same thing. So he was very big about if you got something panned over here and got something panned over here, the next thing you put there, you don't care what the level is on tape. You just got to make sure you don't move the fader.
Wait, you need to explain this to people. Okay, so things that are sharing the same track.
Yeah.
Sometimes to make up space for if you
never had enough room on the tape.
never had enough room.
Never
so
mattered. Doesn't matter.
On a rhythm guitar track, if it stopped and you had 8 bars of nothing, you could fill those 8 bars on the same track. As long as it's panned to the same place if you don't have automation.
A common thing was you would have background vocals that kind of went here and there. They happen on the second and third chorus, but sometimes you'd have percussion on the second verse and the third verse, and you just make sure that percussion lived where those did. And if the percussion was in the middle, you just put it on both tracks, and where you don't have to move the tracks and stuff.
And your thing about you don't want to have to move the level, so you record it at the right level, so you don't have to move the fader.
That's right. If you're doing your job right, you should, and we still do it this way pretty much.
Yeah.
It's still done this way. We were using computers and all that stuff, but if I see a mess, we can't have that. We've got to be organized. And if you have a tape machine or whatever, and you pull that thing up, it needs to be boom, there it is. Sounds pretty good.
With all the faders.
Not at 0 necessarily.
Okay.
I heard about people who did that, and I thought I can't figure that.
That's way too.
I wasn't good enough for that. But you could kind of, once you put the faders in place, and you could have that done by the time it ran down in that 3 minutes or whatever, it was going to sound pretty good.
Eventually, I don't want to jump too far forward,
okay.
but eventually you ended up at Southern Tracks. What happened in between there and Southern Tracks? How many were you producing? Were you engineering?
I was still a bit lost, still a bit of a mess when I was working at Web 4.
Okay.
I actually got fired from Web 4.
Okay.
I was that much of a mess. I'm lucky I didn't go to jail.
Not showing up for sessions or
it's just a whole mess. I was a lot of drugs involved and that kind of stuff. So But around that time, I got married and had a kid.
Okay.
We had a little baby, and I figured that was going to make everything. I was going to be fine then. No. If you know anything about that kind of stuff, drinking or whatever, drugs and whatever, that does not solve it. So I had to make a decision at that point at age 24. This is either how I'm going to live, or I'm going to make a change. And so I quit drinking, quit doing drugs, all that stuff. And strangely enough, the chaos sort of subsided.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, and it took a while. It took quite a while. Mm-hmm. But there's a guy in town had a studio, Ricky Keller. You remember Ricky at all?
Yeah.
Great musician, great guy. He had a studio in town, and I didn't really know Ricky very well, but a friend of mine turned me on to him or whatever, and I went over to just an interview there just to see if I could get a job, pick up some jobs doing engineering, because I'd done some engineering here and there and whatever, and it was a hard gig in Atlanta getting a job, it was just, and I had a family and whatever, and so this is exactly how it went. I go and had a little kind of a small, kind of a shabby studio, but it was awesome.
What was the place called?
It ended up being called Southern Living at its finest.
Southern Living at its finest,
But
that's right.
I don't know what it was called then.
Yeah.
Ricky meets me at the door. Hey, Brendan, how you doing, man? Listen, I got something going on. It turns out he had to go away for a while himself. This is like a year after I kind of straightened my life up and stuff, and I got to go do something for a bit. And here's the calendar. Here's the keys. This guy's going to call you this, and I said, okay. And I that's how it went.
Was it always in that same space?
I think he moved it later. He moved it later because
it was like upstairs somewhere in this place.
No, this is before that. Okay. This is on Spring Street. This was a funky, dangerous little place.
Okay.
I took full advantage of that. And I took every job he could send me. He sent me, I recorded children's records. I recorded a guy playing a bandoneon's record. It was an accordion. He was very specific. This is a bandoneon, dude. Don't make that mistake. Okay. I kept saying, can you pull the accordion closer? And he goes, it's not an accordion. It's a bandoneon. Okay. I did anything that came through the door. And some of it was really, it was all great because I got paid for it.
Right.
But I was learning, and at that point I'd learned things from Tommy and from Web4, and I'd learned about compressors. And I got a job around the same time working part-time at Studio One, which was
Studio One, yeah.
With Buddy Bowie's place. And
yeah.
So I was working back and forth a bit, and I was independent. I never had like an actual job. Okay. I don't think I've had one actual job since then, but.
At Ricky Keller's place, what kind of console did he have? Do you remember?
What was that? I knew he had a 3M 16 track.
Okay.
This is way past the time of 16 tracks.
Right.
But that's what he had. And if you didn't get that tape shuttle just right, it would just snap. So Amec Angela is what it was.
Okay.
Matter of fact, later I did a record with the Chili Peppers at this house, and I don't know if we had a choice of boards we had a recording console, which was a big Neve something they brought in, and then we had a monitoring console, and it was an Amec Angela. I was like, got this down, I'm ready.
Well, you're talking like Blood Sugar Sex Magic, right?
Yeah.
That you did on an Amec.
Well, no, that was a monitoring console.
Okay.
But the recording console, we had two, was a big Neve something.
But you saw the Amec, you're like, oh, I know this thing.
Got this, no problem.
Studio One, talk about that for a second.
Yeah, Studio One was the same as Web 4 was an industrial park. For some reason, people put
Cheshire Bridge area or something like that.
That was Web 4.
Web 4
was another studio on the same little block. The only studio I think that was its own place might have been, was it Axis? Was a big studio here for a minute. I never worked
Was Doppler around at that time too?
Doppler was definitely around. Yeah,
okay.
I worked there some as an independent too, and they had great rooms, but they were a jingle house, and they were very buttoned up and very nice, but they were super nice to me. And
you had a project, and wherever you could find a room, you would work there.
Yeah, I made a point. I was always, for whatever reason, I figured out fairly early that you're friendly with the studio managers. And when you bring stuff in, so many people come in who aren't jingle or corporate clients or record companies, and they don't pay their bills or hassles, whatever. I made sure that whatever I was working on, they were actually going to pay the bill.
Right.
Or it was brought to me. And I had a guy tell me once, and it was the best, it was great advice. He said, hey, you do these independent gigs, this is how you do it. You tell them what your rate is up front. You get paid in cash up front.
Okay.
And if they don't want to do that, they're not going to pay you.
Now, would you charge for yourself and include the studio time with it?
I don't know. Sometimes it varied. Sometimes in Ricky's situation, I would say, like, I got a van and they have $2,000 total.
Okay.
You want to split it with me? I could have there for 5 days. And he'd go, yeah, sounds great. And we'd make a record. It sounded good.
Yeah.
In 5 days.
Yeah.
Sometimes 4 days, because I didn't want to. If I didn't have to work 5 days, I wasn't going to work 5 days.
And what would the studio hours be back then?
All day and night.
Okay.
Yeah. All day.
And what did your wife think about that?
Well, at that time, I didn't work all the time. It was like you worked when you could.
Okay.
And she was of the mind that this is what you're going to do, and she was great about it. I would always make it home at some point during the evening. I always did this too, and I always tell people this is important to me. When you're done for the day, even if you're starting 4 hours from now, don't sleep at the studio. Don't sleep at work. Go home, do whatever you're going to do, get in the car and come back. And because I always did that. First of all, I had little kids.
Yeah.
And so I would always see them in the mornings. I may not have slept, but I would see them in the mornings and we'd hang out. And in that period of time, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of independent, people have compilation records. And then Danny Beard at DB Records started hiring me for all of his records. And he had a little small label, and he figured out that it sounded good. The artists liked me, and and to him, it was really expensive.
Okay.
He was always so funny because I would come to get paid. He was a guy I wouldn't demand. I would get a check later.
Okay.
But I'd have to always traipse over to Wax and Facts because he owned Wax and Facts.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
And he would have to write a check, and it always made it. I could tell it always got him a little bit that I would show up for my money, like, hey, here for your check, aren't you? I said, well, yeah. It was always a thing. But I just I'm going to get over this because this is how we're doing this. So, but he hired me for some records, and that was great. That was awesome because those were generally records that, to me, were bigger budget.
Okay.
I'm talking $4,000 to $5,000 for a record.
Okay. How did Southern Tracks? How did you find your way to there?
Well, that was another place I would use if I had independent things and whatever. Did a couple of my DB records there, and I liked it there. And they had one of the new SSL boards at that time. That was a new thing. And at first they didn't. They also had a Harrison board.
Harrison, yeah.
Studio One had a Harrison.
Okay.
So I know how to work those.
Yeah.
And when I first saw the SSL, it was super intimidating. And I went, oh, this is just a Harrison. I'm ready to go. It really is. It's laid out.
And did they have the automation when they first got it?
Oh yeah, this wasn't one of the first SSLs, but it was one
it
of the
G Plus at this time or no?
No, it was
E?
E.
Yeah.
And the guy that ran it was a really nice guy. Mike Clark was great. So at that time, it really worked out. And so later, that really came into play, Southern Tracks. But at that time, it was another place where I worked, and I just happened to like. To me, that was the place I liked working most for several reasons. One, it was closest to my house,
Okay.
which was great.
Always important.
Yeah, I lived over in Brookhaven, sort of near, right by PDK.
Yeah.
And that's an airport, people. We live by the airport. It was interesting.
You're a pilot, Brendan.
I have a pilot's license. I was a pilot a while, but I haven't flown in a long time. But yes, yeah. But yeah, Southern Tracks, that's where I met them I met Mike at that point, yeah.
How did you get the Black Crowes? Was that your first major label record engineering?
No, I did one or two before that. I'd done some demos with Kansas at Ricky Keller's studio, at that funky little 16 track. And I met Phil Ehart, who became a really dear friend. I've talked to Phil fairly frequently. I haven't talked to him in a minute, but he's still a really good guy. And I was a big Kansas fan when we were growing up.
Love Kansas.
I met him through that, and he was we got along great. And I was just starting to play golf, and he belonged to a country club, which I thought was like, wow, that's incredible. That guy played golf. So we started playing golf together. I was terrible. So we did those demos, and they were about to make a record with a big shot producer, with Bob Ezrin, who was like a big shot producer. Yeah. And Phil calls me some months later and said, we're going to come to Atlanta and do basic tracks. And you've worked at Soundscape, it was called at the time, which was a big studio, and it had a big, I think they had a Neve at that point. They did at that point, yeah.
Okay.
He said, we're going to work with Bob Ezrin, but he just wants to use whoever's in town. And I said, oh, what? Yeah? He goes, I thought you'd be great for this. I go, yeah, this is awesome.
Amazing.
So Bob comes to Atlanta, and we work at Soundscape for about 3 weeks, tracking the stuff. I learned so much in that 3 weeks about all kinds of stuff. The positive things were his thing was, well, he was a little bit of a tyrant in the control room.
Okay.
I'm being fairly polite here.
Okay.
Love you, Bob. He was a little tough. But at the same time, he was only tough to me and to the engineer and the assistants.
He wanted things done fast? Why was he tough?
Fast?
Yeah.
And if you told him anything a little off-center about what was happening, he was like, why would you tell me? Like, I remember, I've used these things I've used ever since. I've tried to be a little more empathetic about it, but not always. He'd go, what about that 1176 over there? And I go, yeah, I think that works. I think that works? That's the wrong answer. Let me know when that works. All right, okay. Well, that's new to me, but okay. And he was very unhappy if things were not working properly in the studio.
Okay.
And so Soundscape was a good studio, but it wasn't. It was an old Neve board. It wasn't always up to snuff, and everything kind of worked. Made him insane. His thing was, I don't give a shit about it. This is your problem.
Okay. And how much did you know about teching stuff? Because consoles back then,
I don't know anything about.
But you just unseat things and put it back in, or tap on the buttons, or
call the guy.
Call the guy. Okay.
Yeah, call the guy. Once you kind of got past all that, he was really, and once you walked out of that room, he was awesome, very encouraging, very, just an awesome guy to be around, and had a lot of stories. And so our first couple of days of tracking, and this was a real formative moment. He asked me to cut something on a 1/4-inch tape, just so we wouldn't waste tape. He goes, "You know how to cut tape?" I go, "Yeah, I can cut tape." He goes, "Everybody says that." He goes, "Everybody says they know how to cut tape." I go, "Okay, well, cut these things together for me." So I cut this 1/4-inch together thing. He goes, "Okay, you cut tape, fine." And editing tape is not like editing now. You literally got to take a razor blade out and cut it in the right spot and put it together and make and don't lose your place.
Right.
So I didn't realize that the way he would like to work is we would track a song, and he had an early computer with him that played some keyboard line. It was a very early little iMac of some sort,
Okay.
with a click track. And they'd prearranged all their songs with a click, and they would play the tracks. They play it once or twice down all the way, however they played it. And they go, "Okay, intro and first verse, boom. Take 1, take 2, take 3, take 4. Great, I like that one. Make a note." So he would go through the whole song like that in his pieces. And then he would sit with the assistant, not me.
Right.
And they would put together a map. Okay, take 1. The first half is going to be, the intro is going to be part of this. And they make a map of what he wanted. Hand me the map and go, "Okay, put this together." So we have, sometimes, 8 reels of tape of one song. I mean,
Brendan, the stuff that can be done in 5 minutes on a computer now, but this would take forever to do, right?
He didn't want it to take forever.
Right.
I'm looking at this thing, and this first song I'm going to work on, I think it's got about 20 cuts in it. Maybe 22 or 23.
Where would you put the spare pieces that you knew were
Well, at that time, I had no idea.
Okay.
I'd never done, I'd cut pieces together and cut, and I thought I really knew my shit, and this was a whole new thing. I did not know.
Yeah, how would I put these pieces to keep track of them?
I was like, I can do this. So he left around 8 o'clock, and I'm there, and there's just tape everywhere, and there's shit everywhere, and the assistant does not, he's trying to help me. And he calls him around midnight. He's out at the club with the other guys, somebody, whatever. He goes, "How's it going over there?" I go, "It's going great, man, going great." He goes, "You're completely lost, aren't you?" I go, "Yes." "Do you need me to come over and help you?" I go, Nope, I got it. I'll see you tomorrow." He said, "Sure, I'll come over." I said, No, I got it. And somewhere between that and the sun coming up, we figured out a system where I would very lightly mark the take number on the piece of as I did them, and we put them back together so we always knew where they were. And if something we knew we were going to need right away, we would put it on the wall, tape it to the wall. I had extra reels. We put little pieces, and I figured that sort of system out just under duress, and that system worked great. Wow. And at that point, I played in the take the next day, and he was like, "Okay, good. Let's move on." There's no but that's all I was looking for. I wasn't looking for any sort of praise or anything. He was like, "Okay, good." And so from that, he did say to me at that point, he goes, "What are you going to do after this?" I said, "I'm going to stay here." And he goes, "You can't stay here. You got to move to LA. Come to LA and visit me, and I'll introduce some people, whatever." And and I actually went to LA and visited him and hung out with him, and he was a man of his word.
What year would this be? 87?
Oh no, this is 89.
Okay, so you went to LA.
Went with Phil, my first trip to LA ever, Phil Ehart.
Yep.
I just kind of latched onto their trip. And he likes to tell that I latched onto him which is completely true. But then I went and met with Bob. I went and met with a couple other people. I met with a manager who I thought was going to be able to help me.
Okay.
Who basically told me, no. I don't even know what you're, no. Who Phil introduced me to, who later became my manager.
Like a producer manager.
Yeah, he later became a guy that helped me.
Yeah.
But at the time, he's like,
I can't help you.
I don't know what to do. Yeah. Come back when,
When you have something.
Oh, in the meantime, I had a song I'd done a song with the Georgia Satellites.
Yep.
On this movie, movie Cocktail.
Yep. Remember that movie?
Yeah, fantastic movie. Just amazingly good. Yeah, not good movie. We did it in a day. We did it at Doppler because it was a good studio.
Yep.
And they had some sort of syncing thing. We could see the video and we could hear it. It seemed like a good idea. Whatever. They ended up giving me production credit on that song.
Okay.
That album had 2 #1 singles on it and sold really well, and that helped me move to LA. Between that and moving to LA, I got a job working with the Black Crowes. A very similar circumstance where I'd done a demo with them for a day with the Black Crowes, and George Draculius was the producer, and he made quite an impression on me the first couple of days. He literally would drink out of my cup and out of my Coke, and he would rummage through my car. It was just, I was like, "What are you doing?" He goes, What? What do you mean, what am I doing? I'm just hanging out. I'm like, okay. He was an odd bird, I thought at the time, and he ended up becoming a very dear friend, who's still one of my best friends.
Okay.
I see him all the time. Mm-hmm. He's family. To my kids and family, he's part of the family. But he came into town. It was a very similar circumstance, except for them, they had no budget.
Are you talking about for the first the record?
Yeah.
Were they on Deaf American?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. There's no budget. Very little budget. I mean, it was more than I was making records for, but it was, I think I would be surprised if they spent more than 50, 60 grand on that album. Maybe it came time to mix it. We spent a little money on the studio there, but everything else was very,
And this was at Southern Tracks you recorded that?
No.
Okay.
This was earlier on. This is like an 89, I think.
Is this like Mr. Crow's Garden or something?
No, they had already changed. Well, they were changing. No, they hadn't changed. They were Mr. Crow's Garden. They hadn't changed their name yet.
Okay.
They're in the process of that.
Okay.
But I do remember going in and recording those demos in a day. And I remember that was one of the first times I experienced, it sounds like a mess, but that guy's good. The singer. That guy's got it.
Yeah.
I remember George later saying to me, what do you think? What do you think, man? I said, well, I mean, it sounded good, but that guy, really good. I knew Chris a little bit in those days too, because he would come to the gigs and stuff. He's a funny guy. And a matter of fact, I think he's the one that recommended that they hire me because I was friends with DB and all that. He hung out at Wax and Facts. And so that was one of my first experiences of just like, oh man, wow. And he just sang all day, sang great all day.
Amazing singer.
And so what sounded pretty good, okay, sounded like great because that guy was good. But then it came time to go back to do the record, and they were going to come to Atlanta, and we did it at Soundscape, the same place I did the other thing with Kansas, and it worked very quickly. Then they asked me to come out to LA to help record and finish it, and they were going to hire a couple of engineers to mix it. And then I think Rick found out that they wanted points and wanted a lot of money, and he go, oh, this guy's good. And I remember Rick coming to the studio and hearing stuff.
Rick Rubin.
Yeah. And he came to the studio, and that's my first experience with him. And I could tell right away he liked the way it sounded. He was surprised that it sounded really good.
Yeah.
And not that he didn't think there were any, but it was more of a favor to George. He just didn't have a lot of connection to it.
Yeah.
And so he started talking to me about how, this is really good and blah, blah, blah. And he could tell I was sort of the adult in the room, even though I was, they were a little younger than me, but we were all around the same age. And at some point he said, you got to come to LA and work for me. And that's how it happened.
Is the first Black Crowes record, and you worked on Blood Sugar Sex Magik, is that, which one came first?
Black Crowes.
Black Crowes.
For sure. So then I moved Rick gave me a little advance. I remember asking, I said, I'm going to need a little advance. He goes, well, how much? And I said how much? And he instantly said, yeah, fine. I went, shit. Damn it. He was starting a company. He wanted to make more rock records. And I think he saw me as a guy that could come in and just sort of handle the engineering part.
Okay.
So I went to LA, and it was a good situation. Neither one of those guys drank or did drugs or anything, which was a good thing for me. That was important to me, to be around people that were, not partying all day and night. At a certain point in life, you got to decide whether you're going to be around that or you're not going to be around that. And I decided for me, that was not going to be something I could do. And then he started making records out there. I made a couple of records with him and George for Deaf American, and we did another something else. And then I got hired to do I was getting hired to do other records because Black Crowes blew up.
Wait a minute, we got to go back to that record, Brendan.
Okay.
So the first record, Shake Your Moneymaker, you did at Southern Tracks.
No, we did that at a place called Soundscape.
So the only time you worked at Southern Tracks was early on, or you'd never worked with the Black Crowes at Southern Tracks?
We did the second album there.
Southern Harmony you did at there. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a phenomenal record. Okay, hold on. Let's go back. I've heard that you played the guitar solo on Hard to Handle. Is that true?
That's true.
What is the story behind that?
Another story is that I played a bunch of stuff on that record. I did not. Those guys played everything. And Jeff Sees did a great job. He played all that guitar solo melody stuff on that record, and Rich played great. And so those were his songs. So I felt like I was helpful to those guys, but they did all that. So there's no question about that. And Chuck Lavelle played key piano and organ. I played organ on one song because they wanted organ on it later. It was She Talks to Angels. I played organ on that.
Okay. That was like an overdub after it was tracked, right?
Like the last day we're there.
Okay.
And by the way, that part and the guitar solo part, they were going to get someone else to play on it. And the story was at some point the Slash was going to come play on it, or someone else was going to come play on it.
Yeah.
And at some point, that just was they couldn't get on the phone.
Right.
That wasn't going to happen. And I don't remember. I think it was Chris just said, "Let Bud play it. He can do this in a heartbeat." So I just want to say that both the guitar solo and the organ solo were played under duress of George Drakoulias yelling at me, going, "Hurry up! Are you done? Come on!" Because he was just aggravated.
So this is the very end of the record.
Well, the organ part was done at the very end in Atlanta.
Okay.
And then we went to LA.
Was it like we need a B3 part here, and Brendan, might you play it?
I think it was we need a B3. I don't remember how that went out, but Chuck Leavell came in for like a day, maybe a day and a half, and just murdered it. He was so great.
Yep.
And he just came in, and the whole record went from here to here because he was the piano. He's an overdub, piano and organ stuff. He was just great at it.
Yeah.
He knew what to do. He was like Nicky Hopkins and that kind of thing. He knew what to do there. So. The last days, I think the idea was that song needed an organ. I might have said, I can do that, or whatever. Someone said, go do that. I think I said, I could probably give it a shot.
And Brendan, had you played B3 before?
I kind of knew how to always play B3 a little bit. I never could afford one, or the only time you could play one was in a studio.
Sure.
But I kind of knew how to do it, and I knew what this did, I knew what the drawbars did, and I kind of figured some stuff out. And my B3 heroes were not like slayers of B3. It was like John Paul Jones and Benmont Tench, and those were the guys I thought. And,
beautiful ethereal parts, pads, things like that.
Yeah, and then later on, when the Wallflowers came along, I remember Rami was. I remember hearing that guy going, "That guy's great," and he actually taught me some great tricks later about keyboards and stuff.
Okay, so hard to handle the guitar solo.
Well, so then we go to LA to finish recording, and there was a couple of vocals to be done. That guitar solo hadn't been done yet, and then it had to be mixed.
Okay.
And this is classic George and Rick, by the way, at this point. I've been to LA twice in my life for a grand total of about 6 days, up until I go there. Okay, Bud, you're going to mix it. Go find us a studio.
Okay, by the way, Bud is your nickname.
That's my nickname, yeah.
Okay.
So you're going to mix it. Go find us a studio. Why am I finding the studio?
I don't live here.
I don't know anybody. I remember calling people in Atlanta saying, do you know any studios where we can mix in LA? And I was I got turned on to a service. So I'm 3 or 4 days in LA and calling, trying to get trying to find a studio, and we found one. And the solo came about where it was like we're like literally at the studio, Paramount Studios in LA, and I think we're there their last day, and this got to be done.
Yeah.
And it was like, Chris was like, Bud can play this. He can play this stuff because. Jeff Cease was not there. They were all back in Atlanta, and the guitar player. And so I went out and did a take, and George, okay, fine. Well, I think I kind of missed one part. Can I? Yeah, okay. A couple of takes, and I borrowed Rick's guitar. Rick had a Les Paul in his bedroom, and he sent it over, and we rented a Marshall amp, or it might have been there, and that's how I did it. And there's a little part in there that
bugs you or something, or what?
No, it's just rushed, and it's in the solo. It doesn't bug me, but Dean DeLeo every now and then would call me, much later. Yeah. Hey man, heard that solo again? It's fucking great. That part's still a little rushed, still a little ahead. I noticed that. Still haven't fixed that, have you?
Brendan, there are, of course, parts of records that you hear that you've done that does it ever get to a point where it's like, I forget what I hated about this? Or is it, if you hear Hard to Handle, you're just like, those couple notes there, that bugs me?
Oh, let me tell you, every time that comes on, I crank that up, man, from day one.
There you go.
We would have a thing also when my kids were little, when one of my songs came on, we had to wait in the car until it was over. Like, we got to sit here until it's over.
I love it.
Listen to the whole thing. And there was a moment there, where they played 2 or 3 songs in a row, and and I had to kind of let that go because you can't keep,
Yeah, at a certain point, almost every song was one.
Well, I'm just saying you can't keep people in the car, and you're like, I got to go. No, I don't. I do hear things, and I hear them now that I've heard years ago, and I know why we did them that way, but I certainly would do it differently now. But I think everybody's like that.
So then from that record became successful. When did you do the Blood Sugar Sex Magik? When did you engineer that? Was that before the Black Rose record had come out?
No. It came out while I was still in early 90. I didn't move to LA until mid 90s, probably. It took a minute for it to kind of wind up, but once it started winding up,
it was big.
Everybody liked it.
That's right.
And especially in LA, they liked it. I think we always had Lenny Kravitz to thank for that because his Let Love Rule came out a little before that. And I remember at the time, George, I'm picking on George, but George is the greatest guy on earth, but this is funny. He would call me and he'd say, you ruined my record, man. My record doesn't sound, nobody likes my record. And like, what are you talking about? It sounds great. Because it was very dry for the most part and didn't have a lot of bass. And that was my mistake. I just missed it. There's not a lot of bass on that record, the instrument, and there's no reason other than I just missed it. It happens. But in listening back, the guitars sort of had all the low end, whatever. That was not an intentional thing. That was missed. And then Lenny Kravitz record came out, and it sounded great. Everybody loved it. And I think Geffen was like, we got one of those, and let's do that. So
Blood Sugar Sex Magik
was later.
That was not on Rick's label, though.
Right.
Was that on Warner or something?
Warner's, yeah.
Rick asked you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You guys did it in a house.
Yeah.
What is the setup for that?
You know, we looked for houses. Before that, I remember Rick was pretty adamant he wanted to record it in the house. He knew what he wanted to do. Wasn't quite sure.
There's videos of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we got that house, we looked at a couple other houses, and he knew what he wanted to do.
Okay.
But he didn't quite know how to do it. Neither did I. But he was like, Rick was a guy that he would empower you to kind of get your thing done. He was good at that. He was like, just handle it.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
I appreciated that. We looked at a house up in Mulholland. It was a very modern, big house up over, and it had great views, and it had a great like rock wall, mid-century. And this is going to be great.
Yeah.
I looked at it. I said, "There's no way we can record here past 7:00 at night.
Right.
It's just not going to happen."
Yeah.
Well, what if we put up this and that? Because Rick liked it, and it was cool. I said, the bass is just going to escape.
Right.
We can record here all day, probably. But once the sun goes down, these are expensive houses. People are going to make us crazy. It's never going to happen. So looked at a couple of places and we found the place on Laurel Canyon, the house that they ended up in. I think Rick ended up buying that house later. It didn't have a kitchen, and it was in transition from being redone.
Okay.
I think it had been in disrepair. It was in transition, and it was brought back up to where it was workable.
Yeah.
It wasn't great, but it was workable. But no kitchen, so they brought a kitchen in to use that stuff. But there's like a big living room in the front. So there's a living room, big living room. There's some little doors, and there's a library, a wood library, probably half the size of this room.
Okay.
So we just walked through there, and we went, okay, this is the control room, the library. This is the main room. And we just walked everywhere. And I don't know that we even looked for anything other than this is a place we can make noise and no one's going to bother us.
Okay.
And honestly, didn't care about the room. I don't care. It's just, we'll figure it out.
You make it happen.
Turns out there was like this basement. It was more like catacombs, but there was I don't know what went down in the basement, but we could put the amps, because they used their touring rigs pretty much. John had his Marshalls and Flea had, I forget what he used, but we put those down in the basement, had the heads upstairs.
Okay.
So we isolation with that.
Okay.
And then this is before Pro Tools and stuff. So
sure.
He hired some guy that did this, that brought a studio, and it was an undertaking.
Yeah. Now two Studers or something like that. What would you have in there?
One Studer.
Okay.
A Studer, and I don't think we had a half-inch in there.
Okay.
Maybe we had a quarter-inch in there, maybe. But we had the monitoring console, and we had a big Neve. I don't know what it was.
Okay.
And then some compressors and whatever and all that kind of stuff. Good mics.
Yep.
They built a little airlock. I didn't know that we need, or actually, one of the guys there may have mentioned that we're going to need an airlock between the library, which just had French doors, and the main room. I said, why? I'm like, we're just going to need this. So they built like an airlock, like a sliding glass door airlock there between there.
Okay.
For the tracking, that's where the singing is, where Anthony stood for the singing.
Okay.
But we just put the drums in the main room because it's big enough. You put it in the big room where everybody can see each other and play, and then once it all got in, you kind of walk around. This will sound fine. Put the drums on a little riser.
Why put them on a riser?
Just that's what they're used to, and
okay.
There's no sound, no sonic thing.
Okay, so it's something that's like being on stage.
It's possible. Also, in that house, they had wood floors and they didn't want to nail into the floors. That's possible.
Got it. I'm going to play a couple tracks from that, little bits of a couple tracks.
Okay.
The drums, beautiful, full, natural drum sound. This is kind of a characteristic thing of records that you worked on. What am I hearing here exactly?
It's funny, whenever I hear these songs on the radio here now, I just think back to that moment. And it was just fun. Everybody knew they were onto something. And it started off a little nervous because Rick was not always great at introducing people. Like I literally showed up the first day, and
they're like, "Who's this guy?"
Like, where's Rick? He's not going to be. He'll be here when it's ready. He's not. We got to get this all working first, And well, he should be here. It's like, you don't need to be here. We're going to be fine. And I was like, gosh, an intro would have been nice. So they kind of hated me right away. Not Flea and Chad, but John and Anthony did not like me right away.
Okay.
I won them over within soon, but it took a minute. But this song in particular, that's not the drums in the main room. There was a little room off to the side, and I think they called it a solarium. I don't really know what it was, but it was all marble. The whole room is marble I know it had marble floors. I don't remember if it had marble walls or not, but there was no deadening in that room whatsoever.
Is all the reverb I'm hearing there natural, or did
Yes.
you add reverb after?
I think on this record, I added very little actual. One of my things I always used from day one was the big EMT 250.
Okay.
Greatest thing ever.
Explain to people that don't know what that is.
Well, on your Pro Tools rigs, you have an EMT 250 plug-in, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But this was like the original digital reverb. It's about this tall, maybe this tall, and has big handles
Big
on
levers, yeah.
It does one thing. It only does one thing. But that one thing it does was essential to records that I was making. And so I don't think I made a record without one, or
And
mixed
what
a
would you
record.
use that on? That would
Drums,
be
predominantly.
on drums predominantly.
Because you could mix it with the drums and it would just sound like the room. But that's all just that room.
That's it. Because the drums sound different from track to track.
That's a
on
kick.
here.
I think of that song, if I remember correctly, it's a kick drum mic, a snare mic, and 2 mics. Because we were in a hurry.
Yeah.
Let's try it in here. See how it
like
sounds.
2 large diaphragm condensers or something, right?
I don't remember.
Who knows? Okay,
Could have
on
been.
tape though. On tape.
But that's 4. I think that's 4 mics of that particular song.
The vocals are dry. Are they totally dry, or is there a small room on them? Because you don't use a lot of reverb on a lot of those early records.
Again, that was all Rick's sort
That's
of thing.
Rick's thing, right? He was
wanted
very
those-
into dry.
He liked them very compressed and very, very. No, I don't think there's any reverb or anything on those songs.
What is the benefit of that, having an ambient drum part and having a dry vocal? Because it's
I don't know.
in your
It
face.
sounds good.
It sounds good.
Well, the ambient drum parts
Yeah.
were, for me, specifically a product of where we were.
Okay.
If we'd been in a very dead house, they would all been dead sounding. I mean, that's just the way. And the main room we had, it was a big room. Someone ages before taught me this trick with gates. It worked great in this room with Chad. Chad's a great drummer.
drummer.
And for some reason, his hi-hat level and it kind of all worked out where I would, if you hear reverb on the drums or snare or the kick on that record, it's all the room opening up with gates. It's not a reverb unit. It's all the room opening up.
So you're talking about the snare reverb is the room mics opening up,
Yeah.
and creating the reverb on the snare.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And like I think I just had a couple of room mics and maybe just
Is this
one.
something that you that would do later on too?
Yeah, but not often with that kind of success.
Okay. And did you do that in mix then on an SSL? Do you remember if you mixed it on an SSL?
I did mix an SSL, but if I remember correctly, I would always do that with drummer gates
Drummer gates,
because
yes.
of the keying and that kind of
Yep.
stuff. But worked great.
So you can really isolate where the snare drum hits. You
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
EQ where that is.
Yeah, I use samples on all my records. I don't know if I used a sample a lot on this record. I did some, but we had such good. They sounded so good the way they were.
And
Compression and everything. you
And
know.
using a sample is to get above the if there's hash in the snare drum microphone, things like that, to trigger reverb, so you got to clean. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons
just
to do
added
that.
a little more impact,
Yeah.
you know. And sometimes, honestly, when you're recording, when you're doing basic tracks, sometimes you're just trying to get everybody in the room,
Yeah.
and getting along, and playing the same song, and hoping magic happens. And sometimes magic happens, the snare's not great.
On a track like this. Flea is an excellent bass player.
Yes.
Would they track live? All the guys. John's a great guitar player.
Yeah,
They track together.
and we kept a lot of it.
Yeah.
Some of it we went back and did again.
Yeah.
Early on, we redid a bass on something, and we were so limited on tracks that you kind of just went over it, and we did that on one song, and we can't do that again. And also in those days, with a guy like Flea, I put 3 tracks: amp, direct, whatever. Now, I don't, what was that about? Just put fucking 1 track; it'd be fine. Sounds great. Just put it
Okay,
all.
Brendan, how did you mic guitars back then?
You know, sometimes we'd have. I think his rig was maybe a 57 and maybe a mic a little further away. It wasn't anything complicated.
Okay.
I would tell anybody that great guitar tones are the player.
Yeah.
You can have a great rig and everything mic'd up some special way, this and that. If the guitar player's got no tone, it's not going to sound very good. You can just throw a 57 or whatever, or any kind of mic that kind of works in from a good amp with a good player, EQ, that's going to sound great. It may not be exactly what you're looking for.
Right.
There are times you get caught up in, what am I looking for? I got this thing in my head.
Yeah.
That's how you spend 3 days on a snare drum. You know, people spend.
Brendan, have you ever spent 3 days on a snare drum? No.
No, I was taught early on, if you're If your people are loading in at 10 o'clock,
15 minutes to get a drum sound, right?
if you are loading in at 10 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
if you're not rolling tape by 2, you're screwing something up.
Okay, I want to play another track.
Now, that's
off
not to
there.
say that you can't search for something.
You can
and
also spend 3 days on a
No, what
snare
I'm saying,
drum sound.
if you need something specific and you're searching for it, that does take time, and that does happen from time to time.
Okay, now this song,
Right.
this is In the Hands,
Yeah, it's really good.
right?
Yeah. I know exactly what that was another setup we had.
Okay, so what am I hearing there? What is that?
We'd done the song, the
Yep.
track already. That intro was done later.
Okay,
So, and there's an edit there, and I can't remember how I did the edit,
okay,
but I remember it was like John or one of those guys said, "I got this intro we want to put on this song.
Yep.
We've already done the song."
yep.
And so I'm like, so you can't just, and he wants to play it freehand, and there's no time code, and there's no. So I think what happened was, so then that's 2 guitars. So I had him play the end of that thing, or he played like the first chord of the, sometimes the first chord of the
Yeah,
song.
that leads into. Let me just.
See if you can hear the edit. By the way, this is fucking great guitar player.
Great guitar.
Sometimes I feel like I don't have a
So that chord sustains over, and you don't.
So he
notice
just
it.
so he did that on the thing he played. Then we went back on the original tape.
Yep.
With the same track we did it on. So
Yep.
that we would, and I said, just play. There's a count 1, 2, 3, and play. To play the last 2 chords into it, so the cut worked. So it worked. But that was the thing. I think John played I think he had a Jazz Master or something, maybe, or a Jaguar or something.
Super compressed.
Well, we had this little setup that ended up working for everything.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but
Okay.
it became kind of a thing. It worked. It was an 87.
Yep.
And it went through one of the Neves in an LA2A, and I would rarely touch it. Put the mic on it, and so he had a little. I forget what it might have been, a Music Man amp or just a little Fender or something. He played that on. Put it in front of it. It's over compressed because it had been set up for an acoustic guitar.
Got it.
So it's just doing that, and he hears that, and he starts, and that's how it worked. But that's all him.
That's
And
what you say when you say it's in the hands. It's his playing.
and by the way, I remember being super impressed with him. I didn't know anything really about them that much beforehand. I didn't have much history with them. I didn't have any history with them.
Right.
But one of the first things we did, first couple of days we worked, I was like, that guy knows his parts. They sound great.
Mm-hmm.
He seems kind of all over the place, but this thing is spot on. And he was right there with Flea. Those guys were, those 3 guys together, they really knew their, and Anthony too. Anthony that was the first time he was really, I think it was one of the first times he was really singing more than rapping and stuff. And he's fearless.
Rick, had you mixed this record? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Were the mixes did you kind of have an idea from basically the setup that you had? You kind of
Yeah.
had all the sounds, so you knew what it was going to sound like, right?
I bet if you came up, I don't know where rough mixes would be from the house.
Yeah.
They wouldn't sound that much different.
Okay.
I think every record I've ever done, they sound.
The rough mixes are pretty much like the final.
I learned early on, there's always have the mix going from day one. First of all, it makes the people you're working with more
Confident.
excited, more confident,
Yeah, and excited.
and excited.
So you always have a working mix going.
Always. All the compressors are going, all the stuff's going, whatever's going on, it's going through the compressor here, the drums are going through, the vocals are going through, and it's all going through the.
So this goes back to your early, this kind of
Yeah.
comes back to your early training.
Absolutely, 100%.
This came out, was a massive success, like
Yeah.
the Black Crowes record.
Yeah.
Okay, when was Southern Harmony? Did that happen next?
I don't know if I did a record in between that. Maybe I did a record in between. I can't remember.
So the Southern Harmony is the Black Crowes' second record,
Yeah.
which is an amazing record.
Yes, it didn't have the instant sort of hooks and
As the
catchiness
first
of the
record.
first one.
That's right.
It has lived well.
It is.
It's
Yeah,
just-
it's a
at the time
classic.
it was a hard record to make at
Yeah.
the time for me and for most of us. They had a new guitar player who was great.
Mark Ford.
He was great,
Excellent
fantastic. They had a
player.
keyboard player by that point, Eddie Harsh. He was
Yep.
did great. But at that point, I was about ready to move on. And but I'd agreed to do that with George and those
Okay.
guys. And once you start calling yourself a producer,
Yeah.
nobody wants to hire you as an engineer anymore. I had someone tell me that at one point. I went, let me think about that. Because when you start saying that,
Yeah.
it's hard to get gigs as an engineer. I kind of knew that was going to be the last one I was going to do. That was the last one I did as an engineer. Did that in Atlanta. We worked in Atlanta about 3 weeks maybe, and worked at Southern Tracks. And
you mixed that record. Did you mix that?
well, we actually went back out to L.A. to mix it, and we started mixing at Record Plant, which is where we mixed Chili Peppers, and they hated it. The guys in the band hated it.
Okay.
Chris, and they hated being there. They thought it was too fancy. They thought Southern Tracks was too fancy, and they had this whole romantic thing about doing, which is fine. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And they didn't like the way it sounded, so we went over to Hollywood Sound, which was a place where we worked. I worked with Rick a lot.
Yep.
And it had an old Neve board. And that's where Earth, Wind, and Fire did a lot of the records there.
Okay.
Four Seasons. We did a lot of our work there because that's where when we did Rick's records, we worked there. We didn't work at A&M or the Big House when Rick was paying for it. We worked at Hollywood Sound. And I was fine with that. And he was very clear about that. First time I went to A&M Studio, I went with like my first week in LA, I went with Rick to A&M to meet a guy there. And I go, wow, this is awesome. This place is great. He goes, we're not coming here. Don't get used to it. We're not coming here. But we went to Hollywood Sound because that's where they wanted to go and mixed it very quickly. And no automation or anything, just kind of, and that's what they wanted to do.
Was the first STP record your first big production success?
I did a record right before that with Jackal.
Okay. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And I've been hired by John Ladner to do a record. I don't know if you've ever met John before.
I never met him, but he's legendary.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Another guy, very supportive of me early on, and he was very opinionated. He was not as big a fan of George as Rick as I was. But he loved Rick and loved George, but he was like, you got to come and work with me. I said, well, first of all, I love it. This is my, I'm not being fair about that. He probably was a big fan of Rick's, but he was very opinionated about what he wanted to do and whatever.
Okay.
And I got hired to this record. And at that point, I was like, I'm just excited to work. And
yeah,
and it was a job. And those guys ended up being really great guys. And they came out to L.A. and they brought their stuff out and
chainsaw.
We had to rent a chainsaw. It was in the wrong key. We had
Is that actually true, Brendan?
Well, the chainsaw. We had to tune the guitar to the chainsaw, for real. We went out and rented a chainsaw.
That's awesome.
No shit. That was a bit they did in the show, and we weren't going to do it. But if they had a good day, I would reward them at the end of the day and say, "Pull the chainsaw out, tune your guitars. Let's do this. Let's do the song." And they started cutting shit up in the studio. And I worked at Rumbo, and I established a really good situation out in LA with Rumbo Studios, which they were great people. Catherine Tennille owned it.
Okay.
And Tony Tennille was I didn't know her at all, but when I would see her, she was very nice.
Okay.
But the people that ran it were great, and it was a great studio. I'd come in the morning early and go, hey, listen, we're having like furniture disappear and stuff, and we'll pay for it. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. I'm not making this up. And they were concerned. They were worried. And I said, it's going to be okay. But they had all their road cases with their guitars, whatever, and their guns.
Yeah. Okay.
But the first big record I did probably was STP. I got hired for, and they were called something else too at that time. And at that point also I'd met the Pearl Jam guys around that time.
Okay.
The guys in the Chili Peppers recommended me to
after 10 had come out, right?
Oh yeah. 10 had come out, and I think in those days it was interesting. I've had a couple of situations where this happened where if you sold a certain amount of records, you didn't have a hit, but you were pretty sure you're going to make another one.
Right.
And that number was anywhere between 50,000 and 100,000, depending on your label and what your advance was and everything. But if you got to 75,000, you were pretty sure it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And if you were trending towards 75,000, I remember with Stone Temple Pilots, I went to see them in Boston. We were celebrating because they were approaching 50,000 records.
Okay.
And we were like, we're going to get to 75, and we're going to make another record. We were like, we are on it. We have done it. And it was I didn't know Pearl Jam at that time, but I think they got to a point with their first album where it sold about 60, 70,000 records, and they were pretty sure they were going to make another one. And their record didn't explode until that was probably 9 months out.
Right.
Out for 9.
So did they think the record was over at that point?
I don't know they thought it was over. They were ready to make another one.
Okay.
Soon.
And you met with them, did you say?
I went and saw them at a benefit in L.A. before they blew up.
Okay.
They were on a tour at one point, and it was the Chili Peppers headliner, Smashing Pumpkins, and the opening act was Pearl Jam. Chili Peppers were like, "You guys are good. You should get our guy to make your next record, dude." They said, "We can't get Rick Rubin." But I go, "Not him. Brendan, Bud, our guy. And so that's, I think between that and a couple other things, that's how they found out about me. I think their A&R guy suggested me too, maybe. But met with them. It's cool, great. Next thing, they go, they're gone. And so at that point, I figured it was probably not going to be for me because I had, at that point, 0 productions out. And to my credit, certainly no hits. But they stayed with it. And I think it came down to me and another person. I think he was a little cranky with them.
Okay.
So I think part of the reason I got the gig was because I was just maybe nicer to them. I don't know.
I want to go back to the Stone Temple Pilots, the first record here.
A lot of reverb.
A lot of reverb.
Yeah.
Now I've interviewed
Maybe too much.
I've interviewed Robert.
Yeah.
I love Robert. He's a dear friend.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the writing of that song, but we didn't talk about the specifics of recording necessarily. Mm-hmm. Where did you guys make this record? Do you remember?
They did Rumbo out in L.A. And it was interesting. I got offered that gig. Things were starting to kind of happen a little bit for me.
Okay.
I got offered a gig from Atlantic for a band, they were a new band called Mighty Joe Young. That's what these guys.
Them? Yep.
I got the demo. Demo was good. It's like,
yeah,
guy's a good singer.
Yeah.
They sound good. I can't do it. Because I had auditioned to play on a record for Rick. Rick was producing a record with Mick Jagger.
Okay.
And Rick wanted me to play guitar on it. He didn't want me to engineer. He wanted me to play guitar on it.
Okay.
First, I think Rick thought I would be good for it, but he also wanted someone around that, that's what I figured. But anyway, so I went and auditioned a couple times and to play on this thing, and it was really good players. And I got the word that it was down to me and another guy, and then I got the gig.
Okay.
And he goes, "It's going to happen. It's going to be great." Yeah. But I was very clear that I wasn't able to tour because I was starting to be a producer, and I was going to do this record. I love playing guitar. This would be a great thing. I would love to do this. I would kill it, but wasn't going to go on tour. So I get a call from different people at Atlantic saying, "You got to do this band, Mighty Joe Young." I said, "Listen, I'd love to, but I'm doing this thing with your Mick Jagger. He's also in Atlantic, so that's doing that." And I just got the go ahead. It's going to happen, and so I'm going to have to turn it down. And but I really like them, like the songs, and I had not met them yet. Literally 24 or 48 hours later, Rick calls me. He goes, "Man, I am sorry." He was really bummed. I felt bad for him. He goes, "This is not going to happen." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "They're going to use the other guy because he's going to go on tour and they don't want to make a change and whatever." And I go, "Oh, but I already told people I'm doing this, which sucks. I don't tell people anything. I'm doing anything, especially I'm playing with Mick Jagger. That was a big deal,
Sure. Yeah.
I'd already told a couple of people, but I felt bad but Rick really wanted it, and he felt bad about it. He was clearly unhappy about it. So I went, "Okay, I appreciate it. No worries. We're good. Great, right." Took me about maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I call up the guy at Atlantic. "Hey, I'm in. You got anybody for that record yet?" "Nope, I'm in. Let's do it." Turns out I ended up playing on it anyway. I came back later and did a couple of days sessions on it anyway, and it was funny. I played this solo thing, and I'm playing, and then I think Mick and the other guy said, "Can you play it a little more like this kind of way?" "Yeah, no problem. Sure." I play completely different, whatever, in a different way. "I'll try one a little bit like this way." Great. So I did it. And Rick goes, "You played it exactly the same like 4 times in a row." There's no,
That's like a Tommy Tedesco bit or something right there.
But he's like, "You played it the exact same. There's no difference. It all sounded kind of country." I said, "Well, because Albert Lee is one of my favorite heroes, and I love the way. And I in my mind, Albert Lee should be playing on this song I played on. So I did my version of that, and that was it. But anyway, I got the job. I went and met with them. Liked them instantly, and they could play. They could really play.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I was like, "Wow, that guy's good. This guitar player guy, the bass player is good, and drummer's good." And I couldn't hear the singing, but I know the demo sounded pretty good. But he seemed fine. I couldn't tell until later we started recording. Might have been Dead and Bloated, or might have been the first on the record. I don't know.
Yeah.
He got on the mic, and I went, "Oh, wait a minute. So that's what that is." You have a great track, and you put a guy like that on top of it. And then that's what happens. Oh, and it was like it was like sort of like when I first worked with Chris Robinson. It was like, yeah, you put a really great singer on a good track. That's how it works. But by the way, we did that whole album, I think, recorded everything from moving it into the studio to loading it out. And by the way, I helped them load out, this is the last time in my life, and Dean likes to say that, last time, maybe the only time I ever loaded anything, but I helped them move their stuff out, I think in 18 or 19 days.
Okay.
And there was another band in there working, I don't remember who they were, and they had not done their bass in that time. They were still working on their bass, and they were so crestfallen because they could hear stuff coming through the walls, and
right.
And they were like, okay, and like we're loading out. They go, "What are you guys doing?" And we're like, "Hey, we're done. We're done." What? We're gonna go mix. I think I had 5 days to mix, which seemed fine.
So speaking of Dead and Bloated,
yeah. Very proud of that snare. No.
Okay, this doesn't have as much reverb.
I know, but you can tell that's the old days where if you were proud of something, you turned it way up, and clearly I was very proud of how that snare sounded.
But the tones, the guitar tones are amazing.
Well, that's him. I'll tell you, a different thing. Like on Plush, like he had this big rack he brought in.
Yeah,
and we just made fun of him mercilessly.
Is he playing with chorus on the guitar on that?
I don't know. It was just a whole rack of bop 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 bop, and engineer Nick DiDia who did all this stuff and recorded.
Yeah.
He's the one who recorded all this stuff.
Yeah.
We just teased Dean about it, and Dean was a really good sport for it. Like we were convinced. I forget who made his stuff. Was it a company? Was it Demeter? Was that the name of the company that made his stuff? I think he still has the same rig. Tells you how good it is. It's pretty awesome. But we were teasing, like, is that your cousin? That's why you have to use this or whatever? Because I was like, I got Marshalls and whatever. I'm going to play through this. So we would mic a stereo amp, and we would do all the basic tracks that way.
Yeah.
Plush just sounded great, and that's a basic track.
Okay.
The drums and bass and the guitar. It's edited, but it's all edited together. And that's the basic guitar track for Plush, just because it sounded good.
Okay, let's talk about Nick DiDia. Nick worked on forever with you.
Yeah.
As your engineer.
Yep.
When did he start working with you?
I was still in L.A. I'd done a record with a band in England for Rick called Wolfbane.
Yeah.
They were on Rick's label. Rick wasn't going to produce it. He sent me to do it, and I brought them back to Atlanta. To L.A. to finish some stuff. And at that time, it's interesting. At that time, things change, whatever, but you had two types of producers. And I really had my eye toward producing.
Yeah.
And I was producing this record, but I was still engineering. But you had engineer producers, people who engineered and made records.
Yep.
And you had song producers, arranger, song producers. The guys who got in my mind, the great records were the song producers, the arranger guys. The engineer producers, there weren't as many options of doing the really great artist. In my mind.
And you're talking about people that actually started as engineers, had successful records, and then got offered gigs to produce. But it was really because of their engineering. Whereas somebody like a George Martin, that was a real song producer that could do arrangements and things like that. That's a totally different skill. You're a combination of both because you have the engineering chops. You're a mixer, and you're a song person and a player. You're a studio musician.
Right.
So you kind of combine all these things.
Yes, but even though I was able to engineer all my own records, I did not want that. I wanted to have an engineer.
How did you find Nick then?
His brother worked at Rick's label, Mark DiDia.
Yep.
And his brother said, "You got to hire my brother."
Okay.
I go, first of all, I don't got to do nothing. Let me tell you, let's get that straight. And he goes, no, he's in town. He's an engineer. He's worked with these people. Whatever. Listen, I got a guy, whatever. So I had this band I was working with, and I needed a guy for a couple of days. And I said, just send him over. We're going to do some vocals and see how it goes. And he's very quiet, very, very New Jersey. It was great. And so I liked him. I like to remind Nick that he came to that session on a bicycle, not for his health, but because he didn't own a car in L.A. Wow. So he biked on a bicycle to that session.
My God.
As soon as I started making records at that point, I liked Nick. And I remember telling him, I think one of the first things I did with him might have been...
Did he work on Jackal or not?
He did.
Okay.
That might have been the first thing we did as a full... There might have been something before that. I don't remember. Oh, I did a record with Dan Baird.
Okay.
For American. That was a blast. And he worked on that. I said, hey, man, look, come do these with me. Listen, you're the engineer, but I don't know how to separate this right now, so I'm not even going to ask you. Sometimes I'm just going to reach over and start doing shit.
Okay.
And I may just kind of bump you out of the way and I need you to be okay with it. And I have a system, I kind of know that, and I just need you to do what I'm doing and to do your own thing at that point. And very, very quickly, he picked up all that and did his own thing. He kind of knew how I like stuff, but he was very quick at, I found very quickly I didn't need to do anything because he was really good at it. He didn't have a lot of experience in cutting tape yet. He had some. I said, you got to get into that right now. Because I would cut tape at first.
Yeah.
And then I said, this, I need you to use my system. My system is bullshit, but it's what I know. I literally learned it in the middle of the night, but this is what I know. And he became great at cutting tape. Once we did our first record, so I never worry about any of that stuff again. He handled it. He also understood that, and this is the way I've always worked, when you're in a studio making records, and again, things are different with different situations, but when you're like a producer and you have an engineer, in my mind, the engineer kind of runs the session. They handle the assistants, they handle how the organization, everything. If I need people to be in a certain place, he knows to kind of put them in the right place. And I've got to deal with the artist and sometimes being the dream crusher. That's part of your job sometimes. And
right.
He understood that. And if I had an issue with something, I wouldn't go to them. I'd go, you got to deal with that. And they're like, oh, that guy's killing me, or she's got to do, this assistant's doing that, and he would handle it. So that's the, again, you empower your people to do stuff. You empower people with work, and Nick was great. Nick didn't mix many of my records only because A, I was good at it.
Yep.
And B, I liked doing it.
Yeah.
And people expected me to do it. And now I care far less about that part of it. I was very personal about it for a long time. Now I care far less about it. I feel like it's, if someone feels like there's some happening whatever, great.
I've met Nick before,
yeah?
and he's an incredibly nice guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Great guy to be around.
Yeah.
And that's also an important thing.
Nick was also very good. I'm sure he's still good at this. Nick's got a big personality. Nick's got a whole thing going on. But he understood that in the studio, that was not his job.
Right.
So he understood very quickly, and I appreciate that from him. His job was to be the hero. His job was to be the guy that made it all work and sound great. His job was not to get in the middle of discussions about stuff or whatever. And literally, there's only so much oxygen in the room, and the artist takes up most of it. I've got to take up some of it, and that's kind of it. And he was very, very good at that. He was best serving the whole thing by just being great at his job and, super dependable and awesome. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask you about another thing on this record. Great Tom sound.
Forward yesterday makes me want
This song has a lot of sections.
what they said was
Unlike songs that you hear today.
makes me want
Did you guys talk about things like song form as far as, did you say verse, pre-chorus? What terms would you use for song form typically?
I mean, those are this kind of, intro,
Pre-chorus,
verse,
post-chorus,
pre-chorus.
bridge.
Post-chorus is a much later term.
Okay.
That I didn't even know what a post-chorus was. Somebody explained it about 10 years ago. What the keep talking about post? Like hitting a post? What are you talking about there?
Okay, spaces like this, that having that break before, I guess you'd call this the chorus, or is this the pre-chorus?
This is the pre-chorus, yeah.
Right? Now, the thing, this song is so good that the pre-chorus is good as most choruses.
Yeah, you'll find many great songs or just one hook after another, and
Right.
they had a lot of those.
Yes, so this,
'cause I like to steal. Take time.
I love that you can hear all the stick drags, everything like that.
Likes to heal.
And then,
Like to steal. I'm half the man I used to be. Well, I'm half the man I used to be.
Brendan, people have no attention span for long songs like this.
I don't.
Nowadays.
I have very little. I mean, I understand that.
If you take from 1965 to now, songs were the longest in the early 90s.
Yeah.
They peaked in length.
Right. Well, I will have to say that that was of making records in that time when I first started. That was a constant source of consternation for me.
Okay.
Trying to get these songs shorter. I don't have an attention span. I think I have the perfect job for my attention span. Why are we waiting for a minute and a half to hear the hook of the song? Let's start with it. How does that work? And so I would have to, or if I heard a part of a song and it was a great part, I think, how many times can we do that part and get away with it? And then we'll take a few out. Let's just ruin it and then take a few out and it'll be okay. Especially in that time, that's not how that's not how artists were. And I don't remember most of STP stuff. There were a couple of long songs on that record, but for the most part, those songs were not particularly, they were still of the pop format. I've always thought about songs, whether they're heavy songs or rock songs, folk songs, pop, whatever, they all have a pop format.
Yeah.
I treated that record, I really enjoyed making that record a lot because I felt like those were pop songs.
Yeah.
We were just...
You're talking more of that they're structured like pop songs.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And good singer that people relate to.
That's right.
Yeah, and so you can have someone that people relate to and they're not a good singer, or you can have a good singer that people not relate. Those don't work. If you have a good singer that people are relating to on some level, that's when it really happens. And then
So I want to just play the one bass fill since we talked about it.
That's Dean's live rig.
That one chord.
Yeah, spooky.
Yes.
I think I may have said to him, "That's a scary part right there." I remember like scary. He played great. He was like a really good, again, kind of a Motown style bass player.
Yes.
Playing in a band like this.
Yeah.
That really propelled the songs. He and Dean were just great foils, and I didn't know those guys at all until we started doing practices and rehearsals. We call them rehearsals. I call them band practice, whatever, rehearsals. And then I got to know them very quickly, and we became friends very quickly in the studio and just working. And
how much pre-production would you do for a record like this?
I think that one we probably, they had a little place over, I want to say it was in Burbank, maybe it's North Hollywood. It wasn't beautiful, little practice space. I think a couple of weeks, and at the last day we were there was the first day of the LA riots.
Oh my gosh.
And I barely got home.
When you went into the studio with a band, the songs were nailed down usually, right?
Pretty much.
The forms.
Pretty much. I kind of we knew the keys, I pretty much knew the tempo. We wouldn't always play to a click track, but I'd always know the tempos to start. I would make very detailed notes about that kind of stuff. I didn't keep any of my notes. I know people keep all their shit. I don't keep any of that stuff. I've kept no cassettes, no notes. I would have my pattern, and it still kind of is a little bit legal pad, Sharpie.
Yeah.
Write really fast, do this, and then I would make a little organizational thing about what we're doing with each song. So I'd have these notes. I have a notebook, and I could look back and say, okay, this is the tempo, this is the whatever. And I got to tell you something also. Very important part of making records, whether you're writing songs or producing or just, is you've got to have the song in the right key of the singer. Super important. I did not learn that right away. I didn't even know that right away. I remember I heard that after we finished this record. I read an interview with Arif Mardin, who's one of the greats, and he helped Aretha Franklin and David Bowie, everybody to sing and whatever. And he was And they were asking him very simple, what are the couple things you do before you get started with a song with an artist? He goes, well, first we get the tempo right. I go, got that. You bet you do. And then he goes, then we make sure the keys in the right, the keys right for the singer. I'm like, huh? What? Don't the people just write the song, the singer sings to that? Isn't that how we do it? Isn't that how it's done? Never occurred to me that that's what you're supposed to be doing. Because up to that point, the records, I'd engineered most of them, so I wasn't the producer. The songs sort of came in,
like they were.
And things I was producing, I think I just got really lucky that all the songs were in the right key. And at that point, it's like, what? I've got to really step my game up here. So from that point forward, I really paid a lot more attention to the key. And sometimes when you work with an artist, especially when you're with a band, you have people in the band who write the songs, and the singer, it's up to them to sing and write a melody to it often. And write a lyric and a melody to it. And I would make sure that we could. At that point, I would make sure we're in the right key, and I would get pushback because, well, it sounds best in this key. Yeah, but no one's going to care if that guy can't communicate it.
Right.
They're still going to care about your song if it's an F sharp instead of G, or A instead of F sharp or whatever. Some people you get more pushback than others about that, but in general, we were always pretty good about that.
The Pearl Jam second record,
Yes.
Versus, how did that come about then? So you'd met the band before. How did you get the call for that? And when you got that, was this record successful when that happened?
No, this record wasn't even done yet.
Wasn't even done yet. Okay.
Keep in mind, I first met those guys, and it first came up that I might be working with them before their first album hit, and it took a period of time. This MTV blew it up. I can't remember the VJ's name, but there was a certain VJ there.
By the time it blew up, though, did you think, oh, I'm never going to get this record now?
I absolutely thought that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they decided to go with you anyways.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, part of it was they were geniuses. Super smart guys. No. How can they not go with me? I think anybody has success, you got to work hard and have some luck.
Yeah.
I worked hard and had some luck. That's kind of what happened there. I worked at it and I got lucky because any number of things could have happened. I know at that point when they started really blowing up and they really started really having. Well, in the middle there, meanwhile, they asked me to remix a song for a video. It was Jeremy.
Well, right.
And I remember talking to. First of all, I spoke to Eddie on the phone, I think. Spoke to a couple of people on the phone, and that was it. And they used that and liked it. And I think the A&R guy wanted me to do it. Michael Goldstone, he wanted me to do it. And I think, again, they've been recommended to me initially by the Chili Peppers guys.
Yeah, which is always the best recommendation, right?
100%. By the way, the best A&R people are other musicians. If you want to find out who is really the next thing or whatever's going on, find out from other musicians.
Right.
Good A&R people, that's how they find a lot of people. And it's different now. You have Instagram and TikTok, and it's a different game now.
Yeah.
But they heard some mixes from the Black Crowes second album, where I was either working on it then, but Stone and Jeff liked that a lot, loved it, thought it was great. I don't know if it was already out or I was just working on it. They'd heard it somehow. So I remember I was working on something in LA. It might have been this or it might have been something else. I was working in LA and I got a call from Kelly Curtis, who was their manager. Kelly's a good friend, and he kind of wanted me to do it. He just liked me, Okay. And he goes, I think these guys are going to decide pretty soon what to do. So might be good to meet with them one more time. I said, you got it. I'm down. Where are they going to be? They're going to be in Nuremberg in about 4 days. Can you be there? I go, what? like Germany, Nuremberg? And they said, yeah, but this is it. I mean, he was like, if you can't make it, I understand. I was in the middle of making a record.
Right.
I was in the middle of something.
Oh my God. What do you do?
The proper answer is yes, I'll be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you said your wife, I'm going to Nuremberg to meet with this band.
No, she knew all about.
Yeah, Pearl Jam was huge.
Let me tell you something. My wife understood all of this stuff probably better than I did.
Okay.
She understood the whole process of what needs to happen. We moved to LA because I was going to work with Rick, and her thing was like, it's an adventure. Let's go. This is where it's going to happen. So.
You married the right person.
She was down for. We treated all of that part of it sort of an adventure at that point, like this is what we're doing. And, and plus I probably wasn't going to be home any less than I was being at the studio for during a process like that. So I left LA, got on a plane, went to New York. No, I went to Atlanta, flew from Atlanta. I stayed here and went to a Braves game.
Okay.
Flew to Nuremberg, showed up.
Right.
And I think a couple of the guys knew I was coming, but I didn't know Eddie at all at that point. And the first few records I worked with him, Eddie was hard on me. He was not easy to get next to, and I understood that. But I remember Stone saying, "Man, you must really want this gig." He just started laughing at me. I go, "I do." He goes, "Well, okay, you're here." I mean, he was like.
Yeah.
He was both amazed and laughing at me at the same time. Like, dude, you are just, this is, sometimes, and I'll tell people this to this day. And over the years, I've done that. I've just gone, maybe not to Europe, but if I want to work with somebody and I really want to do it, I'll go to them.
Yeah.
I'll go to a show and just show up. And sometimes you just got to show up. And then you're there. How are they going to say no at that point? So I was there for a full day, saw the show, flew back either that night or the next morning, I was only gone for about 35 hours, L.A. to Nuremberg or whatever, and connect Frankfurt.
Insane.
But I really wanted the job.
Yeah, of
I
course.
knew it was an important job, and I knew that if I didn't go, I was leaving it in the hands of fate. And I didn't want that. So I figured, I really felt like if I go all the way over there, they're gonna have a hard time. Not at least let me start.
Right.
And that worked out. So.
Now, there must have been a lot of pressure. The first record was massively big, one of the biggest records of that generation. Mm-hmm. Did you feel the pressure?
I think I felt something, not like them. Probably not in the same way. Honestly, I love that kind of stuff. I love it. I love it. I want deadlines. I want expectations. I feel like we're at our best when that's. There are those who maybe don't work at their best, but I think in general, if someone tells me I need this by this point, and here's what we need to have happen, I feel like that's where we're at our best.
I remember when the record came out. It came out at midnight on a Monday night or Tuesday. And I think that was the first time that they did something like that.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest selling first week on about 1 million records. That first week that was set the record. I mean, that was a huge thing.
It was
to have a platinum record in the first week.
Yeah,
you got to be pretty psyched.
Well, It was a moment. Plus, but the other thing, I lived here in Atlanta. By that point, I moved back to Atlanta.
Okay.
Because I moved back here in July and it came out in October. I remember these dates very well.
Yeah.
And I was working on a record with somebody else, and I just couldn't really get into it. That, like, hey, guess what? My record sold more records than any record in history. So, are you going to play that bass part again, or what do you want? It just wasn't going to be that kind of thing.
Right.
But I felt it, and living here in Atlanta, I was completely out of the scene. So whatever the scene was, I didn't ever experience much of that.
Where did you do that record?
We did that record at a place called The Site, which was in Marin County, near San Rafael. Part of that was they lived in Seattle. They didn't want to work there. I lived in L.A. They didn't want to work there. So they committed to working with me. They decided, let's work somewhere in between.
Okay.
Great. So let's go to San Francisco. We looked at a bunch of places in San Francisco. Didn't really like any of them, or they weren't quite right or whatever. I don't remember what happened. Quite frankly, they were all fine with me, but this was up to them. They wanted it. So there was a residential studio, The Site. And they picked that. Mm-hmm. It's fine with me. So I rent, you could all live there. It was a really nice place. And I rented a house not there.
Okay.
I knew enough. By that point, I'm 30 or 31, maybe 31. I knew not to live with the you needed some separation. Yeah. I needed to get in a car and drive. It was only 3 blocks away, but I needed to drive there and back. Everybody liked it there quite a bit, except Eddie. Eddie hated it. Okay. Hated it. And I'm not telling tales here. He said that himself. So that part was difficult, but he did it. Did
you rehearse and have the songs down?
Somewhere.
Okay.
Somewhere. We'd gone to rehearsals and we'd done rehearsals up in. They had a place in Seattle, a little basement practice place. They'd have this was not a rock star rehearsal place. This was a basement of an office of a metalworking shop with a very evil, mean dog that wanted to kill me. I'm not making this up, people. That dog wanted to kill me. We spent some time there. But with some of the songs just came together in the studio, and we arranged some of them there. And I would say probably 2 of the 3 of the ones they wrote while they were there.
Okay, so I'm going to play a couple songs from this.
Him there over a night. I wasn't so sure she wanted him to stay. What to say. Soon she was down, soon he was low. At a quarter past, a holy no. She had to turn around when she couldn't.
Now, To me, the verse part is absolutely beautiful. The two guitar parts. One is almost nothing, just a couple accent chords and one speaker. And the other has this beautiful moving line to it. Everything about this song, the punchiness of the kick drum, the snare drum, when you listen to that, that still sounds like a great mix, doesn't it?
Yeah, when I listened to it back, I think the vocal's a little dark. I would have brightened that up. That's a difference between records in 1992 and 93 and records now. Vocals are a little brighter now, but yeah, I was proud of that. That's actually one of the first songs we did, and in that process of making that record, the initial idea was, let's do 2 songs a week, 2 or 3 songs a week,
Yep.
and we're going to finish them. We're going to record them, edit them, sing them, overdub, mix them, next batch. And they were into that. Everybody, they were super into that process. And because I worked in a way that we mixed the mixing was just, it's fine, easy.
Yeah.
It wasn't a board. It was, I don't remember what kind of board was there, but it wasn't an SL I was used to working on. It's fine. I'd already committed to that whole process before I even thought about what kind of board it was. I went, it's fine. I think it was a Neve, might have been a VR.
Okay.
No, it was an actual Neve. It was an old school Neve. It was enormous.
Okay.
But it had a VR automation setup on it.
Okay.
Yeah. But this thing was, I don't know, was it 60 channels of? I mean, it was and it was great. That was when I went in there. I was like, well, we're fine here. So that was fine. I mixed on Neves and stuff, and there's not a lot of automation anyway. You're just and I knew how to do one kind of automation. This thing with the SSLs, and I was having to learn this fucking thing, and it was. I remember Nick and the assistant having to help me with the automation. I just be like, can somebody just help me with this? I don't, it's totally was not intuitive to me. So I just didn't use much. We just, that's one of the, if not the first song we did, it's one of the first songs we did.
Now Eddie has,
and that's a mix from the first week.
Eddie has a great sense of melody. The shape of the melody is incredibly good on there. Where the spaces are, just the melodic direction that he chooses for that is really strong.
I remember when he sang this one, I knew he was a great singer.
Yeah.
But when he sang this one, I remember thinking, that is as good as anything to me is like Sam Cooke or anything, Paul Rogers, like the great singers that I grew up listening to. Sam Cooke's one for a long time, but that was as good as any singer I'd heard on records. That performance to me. I remember just thinking, whatever is happening here, I've just got to keep this all together.
What kind of mic would you use? SM7, something like that? Now you say it's dark, and SM7 would be kind of. I think he normally sang on an SM7 a lot of times in that particular setup because we had a live setup. Yeah.
So there were monitors.
Yeah.
We tracked all the stuff with monitors. There were not headphones a lot.
Okay.
He had to sing with headphones. Well, hold on. Certain songs he sang. I would pump the music through. He would sing. We use SM7 almost all the time, mainly, but so it had better rejection.
Yes.
Because I'd pump monitors at him. He wouldn't use headphones sometimes. We did that with different people from time to time. But that particular record, we had monitors in the studio.
People sing better in pitch when they have monitors, typically.
Some do,
right?
some don't.
Okay.
Some do.
And you just deal with whatever bleed there is
in that situation, yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember if that song he may have been wearing headphones. I can't remember. That sounds like a much drier song. I remember there's one song we did where I had to go back and we did some vocal overdubs, but we didn't have the monitor system anymore.
Right.
I had to go and recreate that a little bit and go get monitors.
The ambience.
Yeah, I had to go recreate the monitors the best I could
for the bleed.
Yeah, and that was difficult. And if you listen to it, you can hear it. So
I seem to recognize your face, haunting, familiar, yeah. I can't seem to place it. Cannot find a candle of thought to light your name. Lifetimes are catching up with me. All these changes take place. I wish I'd seen the place, but no one's ever taken me. Hearts and thoughts, they fade away. Hearts and thoughts they fade away. I swear I recognize.
A song like that has a dead intro there. That when the guitar and the vocal come in. Now, was this done where they were playing together?
We ended up doing the vocals over and stuff, but thinking this could be cool. And the drums were done later.
Okay.
Drums and bass and guitar and Mike's little licks and stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, Dave, the drummer, did a great job. He's playing a lot. There's no click track. That's just he plays to that guitar track.
Wow.
That was an overdub.
Yeah.
I remember at the time they had a couple songs that were. This was written in the studio.
Okay.
I remember thinking when that song was kind of going, it was one of the situations. It's too low. He's singing too. I wish it was loud. I wish it was higher. Damn. And then he gets to the other part. I'm like, holy shit.
Yes, where it goes up in that second verse.
Oh my God.
It's
I'm
amazing.
Like, okay. It's out of control. That's a moment you're kind of like.
Did you know it was going there though, or was that something?
No,
that Eddie...
but the first time this song they did without a lot of my input, other than well, now that we have the song, let's make sure it sounds good. You know, and I think we went back and did the vocals over a few times. Yeah, I think that was part of that. And again, I wasn't around. I don't remember, but I do remember not being in the room for that moment while this was initially going on.
Okay.
So at some point, I remember we had we wanted a pump organ, or I thought and we didn't have one. So I went literally. There was
flea market or something.
No, it was like either a Walmart or something, whatever the Walmart version in San Rafael.
Yeah.
They had little toy keyboards, and I played that on it and put it through a harmonizer, and it sounded kind of like a pump organ. So,
is that a piccolo snare on that?
I think most of his snares, Dave's snares, were either piccolos or or thinner snares.
Tell me about your philosophy is of that, because a lot of the snares in that era, a lot of people use piccolos.
That was more of what the drummers were doing.
Yeah.
More of what was happening. And a lot of some of the stuff, the heavier stuff also, and you had heavier songs.
Yeah.
And songs that kind of tended to plod a little bit. If you use big fat snares, they sound even slower.
Right.
And if you use like a brighter kit and snappier stuff, it tends to make that stuff not drag down as much. That was my feeling anyway. But again, a lot of like Dave at that time, the drummer on that record, very much liked those drums, and he liked to play a lot of shit.
Yeah.
All the time. And that could be a struggle.
Yeah.
And he liked to play a lot of cymbals, and that could be a struggle.
Like he plays into the chorus, kind of a thing that's
that became a struggle.
Right.
But with all those things, he also was, in my mind, on that record and on Vitology, a spectacular engine.
Yes.
He really was an engine. And he really, like on Daughter, he had a thing, and it seemed busy, but you don't really think of being busy.
No, it's a really unique part. Let me just play that.
Breakfast table in an otherwise empty room. A young girl, violins, center of her own attention. The mother reads aloud, child tries to understand it, tries to make her proud. The shades go down, it's in
everything about this, the guitar tuning, the open tuning and everything is really, really great. Really, what you would think would be a busy drum part, yet it fits perfectly like you're saying. The voice out front, is there any reverb on this, Brendan?
Maybe.
Some of these things are so dry, but yet it works so well.
Depends on what you're doing. Like I would say for STP, I felt like it was a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Great singer, but a whole different, more echo, more of a trippy.
More psychedelic.
Yeah, it's a different kind of different material, different songs.
Yes.
With this stuff, this is part of their aesthetic too. They wanted
more
they
dry.
felt like, and for better or for worse.
Yep.
And they felt like their first album was too reverby.
Too
whatever.
reverby.
I was like, you know that huge hit that everybody has? That one? Yeah, I would live with it. But that was part of their, so they wanted it to be, and they liked the records I did that had that sort of tighter And so that was part of the aesthetic of what we're kind of going for a little bit. And as far as the drums on this one, it was one of those things where we had most records we worked on, or I worked on, I don't know how this worked out, but it just would. Maybe it came from the Chili Peppers doing this at one point, but we had the main kit. And then I found another little room somewhere else and just put a kit in there and put just a few drums, mics in there. And that's one of those songs. That maybe has 4 mics on it. There's no, part of that also was to minimize all the busyness sound of it, to make it more like a ball of sound.
Right.
Rather than this whole, muso thing going on.
Yeah.
I don't remember the reaction at the time of Dave at the time. He didn't love it, but I think once he's heard it all together, he was pretty excited. But that was part of that, and that song. Sometimes you're just bored. Let's try this. And also, I think part of that was we had an acoustic guitar.
Yep.
He had to play in the main room, so we couldn't have the drums in there. So they put the drums in the little ISO room, and those guys track together. You hear them counting each other in. So as far as the vocal sound, in this time, that's just kind of what they were looking for, and it was really good. You can turn it way up, and it's okay.
I want to jump ahead to the next record,
Okay.
Vitology, on this song in particular because of the B3 part, which I assume is you playing. And I think there may be a pump organ in here as well.
There is. It's the one I told you about, the out of tune. Yeah. This was originally supposed to be on the front of a different song.
Okay.
Originally.
And you just put it on it.
Yeah, this song has a history to it. But this whole part right here is live.
Okay.
Singing, guitar, organ, bass pedals. There's a pump organ overdub.
Okay. This is the John Paul Jones kind of sound to me.
It's just what I can do.
I mean, that's really like the,
Yeah.
and then that's the pump organ there.
I'm late with a foot pedal.
Yes.
Because I couldn't find it. It wasn't a B3 foot pedal. It was Prumar.
That's John Paul Jones.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I told you. And I think I might have...
Wait, there's one thing here. This is my favorite part. I love that. And then...
Yeah.
That is so tasteful, so beautiful.
It's so John Paul Jones.
It's so John Paul Jones.
Yeah, well, it's... He, a matter of fact, I'm sure I ripped the sound off from him because he would do stuff, especially on their first album, where he would double track the organ. Like on the beginning of Your Time Is Gonna Come.
Yeah.
That's just double tracked organ.
The combination with that pump organ, because you can hear that sound, that
Yeah.
breathing sound in there too. That's a beautiful combination.
I wanted to play the pump organ live, and Eddie wanted me to play it live, but it was out of tune. It's not in tune with the track.
Okay, so explain to people how you do that when you have an out of tune. So old pump organs.
Yeah, well, there's one right there.
One right back here. Like that one is a quarter step sharp, and many of them are not tuned to pitch. So you have to speed the tape up or slow it down to get it in pitch.
You can use, but you have to speed the tape of the computer up and down a little bit,
Right.
to make the pitch work.
Yeah.
So I ended up playing B3.
On the go down.
But this song had been around since I first met them. And
I think Eddie had written it back in the 80s.
and
or
I made a
something.
comment early on about how I thought this is first day really the first day on the job. They played it in this little basement. I was talking about the practice with the evil dog, and I said, "That sounds great. That's a hit. That's awesome." And everybody just kind of goes, "Ugh." And I just went, "Oh, I have said the wrong thing." And I realized at that moment, I didn't know before that day.
Right.
That's what this is about. But from that point forward, I knew what this was about.
Sure.
But at that moment, I did not, and it was an uphill battle from there. So we tried to record it a couple of times for Versus, and we recorded again for Vitology. We did Vitology. It was actually a fun record to make in this way. We did it all over. They were on tour. We did it in New Orleans. We recorded something. I want to say we went to Chicago, maybe, but I think it was later. Went in Seattle. We did something, worked in Atlanta, Southern Tracks.
Okay.
they were on the road, so I've kind of followed him around, and Eddie he just was, in his mind, it wasn't working. First of all, you have to respect that, and number two, you just got to endure it. You just have to, and I was not letting go.
You were a champion of this song.
I was. It wasn't just that it was, and I understood Eddie's reticence with it. I understood that part of it. I just knew it was just going to be harder to get it done, but it was going to get done because the song was that good. It was going to raise itself up at some point. I just wanted to be when I was around.
Is that Eddie playing guitar on it?
Yeah,
it's a very well executed part.
Well,
on that.
We finally recorded it, and the way we did it was, they played it live. They would play it live at their shows, and it got a great response. It had never been recorded. They played it live at the shows. When you have a band and their third album wasn't out yet, but their second album was out, and so we played the Fox Theater here in Atlanta. They played the Fox Theater. We were at the Fox Theater, and they did a live thing for something. It was a big live show, so they asked me to come and at that point I was living here, and we were working at Southern Tracks a little bit, but they were on tour. And we had tape machines there and everything, and I forget the tape truck came down from New York or something, I guess. I don't know. I recorded all the shows. So they did 2 shows and a sound check. So there were 3 takes, 3 versions of Betterman.
Okay.
Put those 3 versions together, because I remember reading years ago that Frank Zappa used to do some of his records, so he would take live versions and then take the basic tracks and overdub them for his records. I don't know if they're even as good records or not, but he did some like that, and I thought that was cool. So I was looking for any angle, and they played it really well live. I'm looking for any angle or any sort of way to get everybody excited about this. So I brought these tapes into the studio and put together a take, and I said, hey, these takes sound great. So that version you hear, the drums, the bass, and Mike McCready's part are all from the Fox Theater live.
Oh my God.
Those are all live from a couple different takes. There might be a sound check in there somewhere, but they're different takes.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then he was into it because I don't think it was so much, I think a part of it was the process he was into, but it did sound good. It sounded really good, and it didn't sound quite so poppy, and he was on board, and he sang it great. We did it the way they did live, and the way originally it started big, and the first chorus came on, it was huge, it sounded great, and I'm super happy, and this is going to happen. It's great. Eddie calls me last minute and says, I got to tell you, I appreciate it. He was super nice about it, appreciate everything you've done with this, but it's just too big at first, and I can't live with it.
The first chorus.
First chorus is too big, and it starts too big, and so I'm working on something else in Atlanta at this point. He's in Seattle, and I'm like, okay, well, what would you do? And he goes, well, it's just too big. I tell you what, come to Atlanta. Can you come to Atlanta? I can't come to Seattle. I can't leave. You come to Atlanta, spend a day with me. Let's see if we can fix it. I think it's that important. And to his credit, he
that was a great choice.
Well, he did it. I think he felt it was important too. But he knew that whatever the version that I was super stoked about that was coming out, he just couldn't do it. And so that whenever an artist calls you and says, I can't live with something, I got to fix it, the proper response is, okay, let's fix it. Let's do it.
So this is basically you and Eddie then in this intro, right?
That's it. He came to Atlanta and we did this. There is a version that exists somewhere. We did a whole version of the song like that. We did it like 2 or 3 times, maybe 3 or 4 times. But somewhere they released a version of just him playing guitar, singing, and the organs. So
you guys played through until the drums do the build?
No, we played the whole thing.
Played the whole thing,
song,
okay.
Until he was satisfied with the singing.
Okay.
And when he was doing it this way, he was fully engaged, and he was right about it, because the intro and the first verse of this is
amazing.
It really is. He was 100% correct about it. And it's better than the version we would have done with the whole, but we had to edit it somehow to the other version.
Right.
And I did not know what that was going to be about. And we'd already finished the other version.
Yeah. Now in Pro Tools nowadays, you can do it so easily.
Still, how, where?
Right.
And edit, and Nick did it somewhere. I know where it is, but it took me a while to hear it. And he figured it out, and there's an edit between that on the 2-inch tape and the thing, and there's the song, and it works beautifully. And so once we're into the song, the singing's not from that day. It's from Yeah, I think. That's one of these things where you just got to do whatever is necessary for the artist to fulfill whatever they see in it,
Brendan, do you think that it's hard for people that don't do this for a living to even imagine how songs are put together? Because I'm always talking about this.
Yeah.
That this is a completely strange story of the melding of two two versions, and you look at the Beatles' Strawberry Fields with the weird edit in it, and then slowing one down as speed went up. That there are so many ways that songs come together.
I don't think it's their job, the listener's job. I've always felt that way. It's not their job to figure out why the kick feels funny in this section. It's not their job to figure out why it's in the right key or why there's a choice made to eliminate this and to repeat this. It's not their job. It's their job to go, I like that or I don't like it. That's it. Or to do nothing. There are three. To have no opinion, which is the worst. But it really is not the listener. It's not their job. It's their job to go, I dig this, I'm going to tell my friends. Well, that's what your job is, to kind of get them to, hopefully they feel that way. Or to go, I don't dig it. The way you get there, it's like anything else, like making movies or building a house or whatever. You've got to have process, and you've got to figure out, at some point, you got to have faith that you know what you're doing, or that someone in the room knows what they're doing. And you have to have faith that your artist knows what they're doing, because it ultimately is it's their thing, it's their day.
I want to ask you about this bass part that I asked Robert about on STP on Trippin' on a Hole, because this is such an original.
Nuts.
Crazy.
I'm actually on this song, by the way.
What do you play?
I'll show you. It's in the solo. All right. You listen to "Standing in the Shadows of Love," or that's kind of the same thing you're hearing there. You hear "I'll Be There" or "Reach Out, I'll Be There." The bass on those songs.
Yeah.
James Jamerson or whoever is doing those bass. I don't know if it's Carol Kate, but that's very similar to that.
That style.
Very much.
Yeah.
I think it's almost the same.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's it's one of those things where I always felt like STP was really awesome, and that they had kind of a almost prog guitar player who's friggin' great at this shit.
Yep.
R&B kind of bass player.
Right.
And a really great singer. I mean, it was the same way, like when I was a big fan of Yes when I was a kid, and Steve Howe, the guitar player. It was like a prog band dropped Chet Atkins into their band. Steve Howe was basically a Chet Atkins disciple.
Right.
If you listen to all his stuff, it's all like finger picking, like that's basically what it is. It's more fleshed out, whatever. But I always felt like that was like the English version of country was what was passing as prog, and I always felt like that with Robert. Robert was an R&B Motown bass player in this sort of pop alternative band, and it worked great.
Now the guitar solo section of this.
Okay, I'll show you what I'll show you what. I literally grabbed a mic, at some point. Every now and then I would grab a mic and sing as a demonstration, whatever. Hey, try this or whatever. And I remember that I was going, and anyway. they insisted that we leave that, so.
A record that you did that is one that, to me, never didn't get its due, I think, is Dogman by King's X.
Yeah.
I want to play something here.
That's pretty heavy.
So heavy.
Okay, so it can't be right. I cry and try and think and fight. Okay, so I need some help, but they can fix the
Hi-hat sounds amazing.
He's a good player.
Just one day, just 1 second, maybe just a minute. Feel no pain. Oh, I walk the light, black the sky, like the
That sounds so good. When you hear that, even now, you're proud of that,
Yeah,
right?
very much so. I agree with you. I don't think it got its fair shake. Everybody thought they were poised to go. And I don't know if it's just people didn't connect or record company problem. I don't know. It just didn't happen. But it's interesting. That's the first song. That's the first record I did when I moved back to Atlanta from LA. In the studio, it was almost brand new again at that point because I had Mike Clark. I told you about Southern Tracks earlier.
Yeah.
I called him about 6 months before. No, not even that. 4 or 5 months before we moved back to LA. I said, "Hey man, I think moved back from LA." I said, "I think we're thinking about moving back to Atlanta." We put an offer on a house in LA, and then we just like at that night we went. We don't want to be. We want to go home. We want to, We had 3 little girls at that point. You can raise girls in LA. It's great, no problem. We just chose to raise them back in Atlanta, and it was just starting to happen for me. So most people I knew thought, "You're out of your gourd. This is dumb. Why would you move away?" I was like, "I don't know. I think it's going to be okay." But I called Mike Clark. I said, "Listen, I'm going to buy a house in Brookhaven, mainly because it's close to your studio. So, but I need you to make some improvements because it's not quite a, He goes, "Well, what are you talking about?" I said, "I need a bigger board, more mics, better machines, whatever." And his response was, "Okay, great, no problem." Now, what I suggested to him was over $1 million of improvement.
Yeah.
And he just went, "Okay, sounds good." And I just went, and so I got to tell you, him saying that at that moment gave me such confidence. Like he didn't think about it.
Right.
So I'll always be appreciative of that because that was a moment where I was like, I think I'm doing the right thing. I mean, if he said, "I don't know, man, let's just see how it goes." I mean, but he's like, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Let's do it." Like, no hesitation.
And he bought a SSL G Plus then,
yeah,
correct?
big SSL, bought a bunch of new mics.
I want to talk about some technical things here about this as far as the mix of this. Okay, so there's this beautiful low sub to this. Did you mix with a sub back then?
I don't think so.
Okay, what did you mix on?
I mixed on everything but NS10Ms.
NS10Ms.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you know you got the low end right?
Very simple. It's I can't remember the guy's name, but I told you worked at K&M before that, and I was mixing something. I think I was mixing Aerosmith or something, and he was mixing he mixed all these great pop records, and I can't remember his name right now, but he goes, "Yeah, you know when you got because he had great low end and all this, and he goes, you got it going when you have it not too loud but kind of loud, and the speakers are jumping." Or flapping, that's when you have enough low end. I went, that makes sense. Because you can't hear it.
Can't hear it. Just watch the speakers.
Yeah, watch the speakers. And if they start, you hear the flapping, you got too much. If you see them flapping, you're doing good. So that's how I mix most of that stuff.
Okay.
Plus, if you turn it way down,
yeah,
you can hear the low end.
The cymbals don't sound like they're being compressed. They're super clear.
I don't know. I'm sure they were at some point, but no, not. I mean, the whole track's being compressed.
The whole track's being compressed, but the cymbals are not splashy. It's not like you have your room mics that are super compressed and everything's just all hashy.
Well, part of that is also, at this point, again, I moved to Atlanta and I had started buying gear to have there.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I have so many guitars is because in my mind, I live in Atlanta. There's no rental anymore, so I got to have all this stuff here, and that was my explanation. So I had tons of amps and tons of guitars and drum sets and keyboards, but I always bought old, sort of crusty Zildjians, and they were more expensive than the new ones, but they spoke better. You could compress them. They wouldn't overwhelm the track. If you put a bunch of brand new cymbals up and you try to brighten and compress your drum track, it would sound like cymbals a lot more. So. And the drummer, Jerry, didn't hit particularly hard, and that was always great.
Yeah.
If you had a drummer that knew how to get not aggressive, but a really good sound without hitting that hard, always better. Most of the drummers I've worked with who did not hit as hard, it was easier to get them to sound great. But the ones who did hit hard, you just figure it out.
The balance, though, between the cymbals and the drums is incredibly important. That the actual drummers are self-balancing. If you watch John Bonham, he does not bash the cymbals.
Yep.
He hits the drums hard, but he does not bash the cymbals.
That's exactly right. And I don't know that that's something you teach. I've worked with lots of great drummers, and they all have some sort of version of that going on. All of them, and they all have some version of hitting the snare in the right place, and some version of some are better than this than others, but the drummer's job is play great, repeat. That's it. you got to repeat it. I don't need a bunch of different stuff going on. Your thing's got to be the same thing pretty much every time. Most really good drummers get that and understand it and want to do that.
But there's so much clarity to this, Brendan. The guitars, doubled guitars. There's so much space for the drums, though. The low end's huge. The voice is right there. Sounds really rich. When the guitars come in the chorus, too, just the low tuning down to B and everything, just sounds huge. Does having the low-tuned instruments, do you think it helps the voice jump out or get out of the way of some of the things?
I don't know.
Is there a psychological thing of that?
Maybe, I don't know. This guy's a great singer. And so is Ty, who chose, I don't think he sang anything on this album. He sang all the backgrounds, but he was also a really good singer, the guitar player.
His guitar parts are so tight, too.
He's great. As a matter of fact, I used to kind of, not frustrate him, but he was a good sport about it. Such a good player and such an effortless. Every now and then, I need to hear the struggle. And I need,
Sounds too good.
He was just such a fantastic player. So I had this. I still have it. It's a Hofner violin guitar, and it is not easy to play.
Okay.
But I had good strings on it.
Okay.
And it was set up, and I would occasionally have him play that for parts. Because I was like, I just need I need to hear the work a little bit. I want to hear the work. And he'd be like, all right, I'm game. And he was into it. I mean, he was game. He wasn't like, how dare you, whatever. He was like, okay, if this is what you want, let's do it. And I'm not saying it was something he was super stoked about that, but there were occasionally, if you got a shredder guitar player, put a sort of an inferior guitar in their hand, and you can hear it work a little harder.
Do you get disappointed when a record that you know is a great record like Dogman and it doesn't do as well as it should?
Sure. Oh, yeah. This sort of brings to mind, you talked about earlier, I don't really do many interviews or whatever, and that's not completely some of that's a business thing. If you don't talk about anything, the only thing people know you for is your hits, through your big records. Right. They don't know all the records. You're not talking about all of them. They don't really know about them.
This is a record that musicians
for sure.
know because they love the sound of this.
Yeah, I understand that. And this was disappointing to me because also it was at a time where everything else I was doing was taking off, was blowing up. Why did this not blow up? And I remember thinking at the time, you got to be a little philosophical about it. No, I'm just pissed. I take it all a bit personally. Yeah, I still do.
When people hear this record, they're like, wow, that sounds amazing. And even if the record is not as commercially successful, people want to work with you because you get sounds like that and you make records like that.
Maybe at one point, but I think that you are, as a person in any business, you are hired or fired upon your success.
Right.
When you have successes, people keep hiring you, and if you don't have successes, it's harder. And also, if you tell people no a lot, they sooner or later they start believing you. And you say no all the time. I found that from time to time. You keep saying no over and over. Okay, I believe you. No. All right. Artists and musicians and artists, they look at it's a little different than it used to be. When I was making these records and all through most of my career. Up until the mid 2000s, probably started changing a little bit. I was very conscious of, very in the front of my mind of what I'm working on, whether other artists that I work with a lot are going to like it, or they're going to be pissed about it, or are they going to be offended by it, or are they going to be neutral?
The politics of it.
Yeah, and I always thought about that, because I had 2 or 3 artists I worked with a lot, and I would always think about, are they going to be upset with this? Invariably, if I did something that upset one of them, that was it.
Yeah.
It happened. I can think of one time in particular that happened, and it wasn't logical. There was so little logic involved, but that was,
When you're working with musicians, sometimes logic goes out the window.
I think it's just with anybody. But look, I love what I do, and I love being a musician. I love working with musicians. I love being a person who is dependent upon to. I like that part of the job where I'm dependent upon to help keep it together and pull it together and make sure there's a finish line and make sure that we're getting what we need. But sometimes you make choices, and you got to be a little calculating about it. And most often, that all worked out. But what's really hard is you're making 3 records at one time in the same city, and you can't let the other artists know what you're doing. None of the other ones will know what you're doing. That's happened more than a few times.
Okay.
Hard to do that when I was in Atlanta, but when I would work in LA, I would go
Easy to do it though.
But
easier.
I can think of one point where I was making a Rage Against the Machine record. I was doing STP's 4th album.
Yep.
And then I did a Korn record. Was producing all, but they all started at different times, and I thought I had it all kind of, you kind of book things in slots, where they all kind of roll. This one took for longer, this one took longer, this one's starting, and
So you're doing pre-production with the band, then you're going in to record and doing stuff like that at the same time.
Yeah, but no, that's not how this worked.
Okay.
I'm doing one record, and it drags on for various reasons. We did a lot of tracking, and then this, for various reasons, that ended up taking a year.
Yeah.
Another record with STP, their album, number 4, we got through a good bit of that, and then Scott had some difficulties, and that dragged on.
Yep.
And then I'm starting his other record with Korn, which is actually going sort of on schedule, but I'm doing them all at the same time by this point. Mm-hmm. And I can't let any of the other ones know what I'm doing,
right?
Because it's just bad. They don't want everybody, when you're working with someone, and I am this way, when I'm working with someone, I'm there. Yeah. I'm not somewhere else. Yeah. But they don't want to know that you're spending the morning trying to get something together over here and then coming, and that's just, it was hard. And I've done that more than a few times.
Okay, so...
But that's part of the job.
Speaking of Rage... Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That guitar part is so iconic, that sound. Mm-hmm. What is that sound? A wah with...
It's a wah. I'm not sure. You have to ask Tom. That's all. He was a wah with. I think it's probably got some sort of one of his pitch things on there.
Okay, so
he was always doing shit.
Now this record, if I'm not mistaken, Andy Wallace mixed.
He did. Yeah.
Let me play this track because this one sounds massive.
People come up.
That's an Allen wrench.
Is it?
Yeah. We gotta turn the bass up on this one. Check it. Since 1516, minds attacked and overseen.
I can't think of another record that you didn't mix. Why did you not mix this record?
Well, at the time, I took it very personally.
Okay.
I was very unhappy.
Okay.
I was starting something else. This is the first one I did with them, but it took a long time to get done for various reasons. And, Zach had a thing where, people they have their creativity when it happens. And we would track most of these songs and have a lot of ideas and kind of thing, but it would take a while to get the vocals kind of worked out. And he would just take, but once he was committed,
he'd do it.
He's as good as anybody. And Zach had an unusual ability, even though he's rapping most of it and with flow, they had sort of he was very conscious about the hooks and how to make them work, and he was just really good at all that. But he was got in front of a mic, and it was not a lot of work to do once he got in front of the mic.
Right.
It took him a while for this record, and this next one, the same thing. That's what took so long. And by the time we got to where we were finishing the vocals, and it was about time to mix, I started another record, and I needed 2 more weeks before I needed 2 weeks before I could mix. I was told, nope, got to have it right now. And there was some politics going on and some unpleasantness going on, and I said, okay. Andy's great. He did a great job. Sounded awesome.
Great job.
Did a beautiful job.
And he mixed their first record.
Yeah, but I was very unhappy about that at the time.
Yeah.
Like I said, now great. You want to spend 2 weeks? Great. But at the time I was very unhappy about that because I felt it was my job to see things through to the end. But he did a great job. It sounded awesome.
Sounds
great.
And
after that, I was kind of like, maybe I don't need to do this as much. Maybe I should let somebody else do it now and again. Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, that stuff was laid out. It was not a very complicated record. It was. Yeah. They did it. We did that. We did all the basic tracks in a rehearsal room.
In a rehearsal space, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk about Drops of Jupiter.
Okay.
Just for the people that don't know this, everyone knows this song. That's Chuck Leavell, right?
Yeah.
Southern Tracks.
Yeah.
Now that she's back in the atmosphere with drops of Jupiter in her head.
Are you playing organ?
Yeah.
Okay.
She acts like summer and walks like rain. Reminds me that there's a time to change. Hey, hey.
How much of that is live tracking on this? The Paul Buckmaster did the arrangement, string arrangement.
Piano's all live, and the drum. We edited a lot, so probably I don't remember exactly how it was. This was done mostly with the band part in a day.
Okay,
maybe a couple of days.
Yep,
if that. And this particular song came. We'd already finished a record for the most part. It came later.
Okay,
the idea being need one more song, and they all came back to Atlanta. We did this, and so the idea was there was a piano thing with it, and a lot of times when we did the records, either I would play piano as the overdub on their records, or someone else in the band, Rob, would play piano sometimes on the songs, and but at some point, I was talking to Pat, and he said maybe you can play whatever, and I was like no. This is like a real thing, and
because it's a real piano feature.
It's a real thing, and also and at that point, everybody's kind of everyone was a little exhausted with the process at that point. And these are really good guys and really good players, but it's just like we got to come back to Atlanta and do one more song, okay? So when you bring a really great musician in, this is not news to me. Chuck actually played on the Black Crowes thing, and it's a little bit of like when the Beatles brought in Billy Preston. They weren't getting on, but everyone's on their best behavior when a good musician comes in. And Chuck was great, and I knew he would be perfect. I was just hoping he'd be available. There was talk about a couple other people playing on it, whatever, but I remember at the time it was definitely Chuck was, if he's available, I think he'll come and do it. And he was absolutely great, and everyone was on their best behavior.
Okay.
Everybody played great. Everybody was on time. And then I think we just went back and filled in all the guitar parts and the vocals and backgrounds and all that stuff.
When did the string arrangement happen?
That came a little bit later.
Paul Buckmaster's a great choice. Why him though?
And, it really wasn't my idea.
Okay.
There was we had used David Campbell on something else. He's phenomenal. David was a lovely guy and very talented, and he did another song on the record. He did a beautiful job. And we actually thought that song was kind of the song that was going to be what this ended up being. But at the label, Donnie Einer, at the time, Donnie, I remember saying to me, he was very straightforward, and he goes, look, I'll put this out. This is great. But if I have a real lead single, we can really do something here. And what do you say at that point?
Right.
No, we're going to stand pat here.
We're there.
I think you have to do what you got to do. And so they kept writing, and then they finally came with it. But I think it might have been Donnie's idea or somebody. But the idea was we should do something with a sort of Tiny Dancer kind of feel, whatever. And the idea is, well, let's get that guy. I'm sure he's around. And somebody reached out to him, and I spoke to him on the phone. And Paul was a spectacularly opinionated, odd, lovely guy. Obviously very talented. Did some of the great string.
Oh, brilliant.
And I really enjoyed being with him when I was with him. But he would also throw out conspiracy theories to you and whatever. And you have to kind of go, let's just get this, and let's just do this. And he didn't want to change stuff once he did it. Yeah. But you invariably had to change things. So I would, you would have to say, hey, this is going across here. Can you have this mimic the organ part here or whatever? I'm thinking more of something else. I understand that, but so it's like you're literally dealing with a whole different artist. And he was great, and he did it. And we went out to we did it at Capitol. Okay. And it became a completely different song at that point.
It's incredibly well written. String arrangement. His emphasis, the way he uses the the cellos and things like that, the lower mid-range instruments, and it's super.
See, cellos. I would always tell the arrangers, lay off the cellos as much as you can. We can't hear them.
Right, can't hear them. But this
one you can.
Thing you
can.
There
was room for it.
Yes,
there were no real heavy guitars going on.
Was that on purpose though? That you kind of limit the amount of electric guitars?
This is just how it kind of went.
Wow.
So when that was happening, I remember thinking, I usually say to an arranger, not so much cellos. I can't hear them, and it muddies it up. But he did it, and it was great, and came out, and people loved it. And
give me some technical things. When you mic a piano, is that like a C24 or something like that? What would you use there?
In that time, well, if you have one, what's the Sony or the AKG that's the stereo mic? What is that?
C24.
Okay, there you go. If you got that, That's
You
awesome.
got that? It's your gold.
I'm happy.
Okay, when you were mixing these records
Yes.
back then, would you use the bus compressor on the console?
Yeah, sure. All the time.
And what would be, if you were going to, the drum subs or something like that, what would you, what would be something you
Well,
liked?
I would not use. I had a thing for the drum subs for a long time, which was great. At our studio in Atlanta, Southern Tracks, we had this. And then when I started working at Henson a lot, they actually put these in all their SSLs because I used them. I don't think it was just me, but I go there and they start showing up because I was like, oh, right on. They didn't quite automate right, but they worked. But they used to make a stereo channel for the SSLs.
Okay.
They had a stereo compressor.
Okay.
That compressor sounded way different than all the other compressors. I don't know what it was. It's just different. And you turn that on a little bit, boom, your drums sound great. Like instantly. Like instantly sound great. There's cheating. And I would use them sometime as the main thing or sometimes as a side chain, but they always sounded great. And I remember talking to the SSL guys at once. I wanted to have one made outboard. Well, they didn't want any part of that because then, I'm going to take it and they didn't need to, they weren't going to do that, but they tried to explain to me that it's the same as two of the other compressors together. I go, oh yeah, I know it's not. And it's not the same as the mic, the compressor and the mic, and it's not the same as the outboard compressor. It's just different. I don't know if they ever admitted to me that it was a different compressor, but it was definitely a different compressor, and it was great.
When you started making money and went out and bought gear, what are the mic pre's? Did you buy some Neve 1073s
I didn't buy
or something?
anything that I didn't need.
Okay.
I don't care. If it works, I'm in.
Okay.
If I plug it in and it works, I'm good with it. Now, having said that, most good studios already have a rack of Neves there.
Is that something that you prefer to record through Neves?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Why not? Now, I did end up buying a rack of Neves, and I did end up buying some Tube Techs and DBXs, and I use those every day now, all the time.
All right.
I didn't use them for about 20 years because I didn't need them. But I had a little mobile studio that I would carry around. I recorded Rage's record on that, and I sent a Sony MCI machine out to LA, and I have all the mics. But I bought all these things, in the early 90s. When I first moved to Atlanta, I had a studio in my house. I've had three different houses, the ones that were in Atlanta that we moved into, and all three of the houses I put really nice studios in them.
Okay.
Never used them. I didn't want to work. I realized
didn't want to work at home.
Didn't want to work at home. And when I put one in the first house, my kids were little, and for whatever reason, early on, I made a decision to drive to the studio. And when I drive to the studio, I get in the headspace and go to work, drive home, it's gone. I don't think about it at home. I leave it there. But that drive is how I get in and out of my gig a lot. And plus, my kids were little, and they were just not used to seeing me work. I never worked at home. When I was home, I was there. I was there to hang. So I would go into the studio. We had a door from the kitchen into the studio. We just bought this house in Brookhaven and put a studio in there. And I was in there for a couple hours working on stuff, and I just kind of opened the door, and two of my little girls just sitting there waiting on me. They're just waiting. Like, God damn. Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That room became a pool table room later.
Okay.
And I made all that stuff mobile and put it in my next house. Didn't use it there. Put it in my next house, built a little, and used it some, but not much. And now I have a production room at Henson out in LA, and it's all used. I use it there.
When you recorded at Southern Tracks, what would you use for your drum room mics? Do you remember? Or what would Nick use?
Sometimes it varied. Sometimes it was whatever mics were left.
Okay.
But often it was either a pair of, might be a pair of 414s.
Okay.
Might be a pair of 87s.
Large diaphragm condenser mics.
Yeah, whatever. And I would always sometimes, we'd have talkback mics too.
Yep.
And I always put those on a channel.
Okay.
We have them summed up. And we put those on a channel, and every now and then that sounded great. So, but at Southern Tracks, we didn't really use room mics. Really, we had a thing where we had a smaller room.
They had that kind of
originally built as a piano room in the back.
Yeah. They had the glass door on it.
The drums were completely contained in there.
Yeah.
And so all the room sound, everything was from that room, not from the main room. We'd mic that kit up and then put a couple up in the top of the room, and
I went to Southern Tracks maybe in the year 2000. I don't know why.
Okay.
The drums were mic'd up.
Okay.
And I saw on the toms
Okay.
a 421 on the top and a Y cable and a 57 on
Oh,
the
yeah.
bottom.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. We stole that from somebody.
Tell me about that.
Okay.
Would you go into one mic pre with that?
Yeah.
And they would just kind of self EQ?
Well, I remember we went to do something early on. This is early. In Seattle, maybe.
Okay.
And we came back to Atlanta. I think Mike Fraser, who I got to know later. Do you know Mike at all? Engineer?
I know he is. I don't know him now.
He'd recorded a band there. I don't remember the band. I'm sorry. This is terrible. I should know, but he recorded a band there. I don't know what it was. And we got back, and there are all these mic cables that are still there. They were there. They were put together, and they had little phase things in one side. And we're like, what the hell is that? And Mike Clark explained to us, well, he would just put this here and there. Let's fucking try that. Well, I got to have to. No, they go to the same input. And we put them on, and it was like, that's stealing that right now.
Yes.
I think it was Mike. It might have been somebody else, but we stole that. And those actually may have been the cables they left there. I don't remember, but we used that forever. But that was a little unique to Southern Tracks because you wouldn't take those cables everywhere with you. We had to go somewhere else. We would just live with it, mic the top and whatever. But it worked out great.
And the sound of it, I have some cables like that. You can really hear the sound of the whole drum.
Sounds great.
It's kind of like miking the top and bottom of the
If
snare.
they're good drums and if it's a good drummer.
Well,
yeah.
I always ask everybody this. What is a perfect song? Not one that you worked on or anything, just a song that you think is a perfectly written song.
I mean, it's probably something from my youth because that's where we're all nostalgic about that stuff. Whenever I hear Without You by Nilsson, I think that's about as good as it gets right there. Everything about that song is pretty great. Great song, great singer, sounds awesome. Paul Buckmaster.
Yeah, Paul, that's right.
Did the strings on that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if that song comes on or anything, I leave it on. I every now and then I just go find that song and play it. Some of my favorite records from of all time are all of the Elton John, Gus Dudgeon records. First of all, they're great songs. It's Elton John. All that's great. But those songs sound very put together, very arranged, very, very thought about, but not labored at all. Like it sounds like they're just energetic, and I just know that they made 2 records a year, so they weren't that labored.
Right.
But they sound so together and just well done, and they sound great. You put on any of those songs on right now, they're great. They match up with anything right now. So,
what is your favorite Led Zeppelin record?
Well, 3.
Okay.
Probably off the top of my head, but it's hard to argue with 1, 2, 3, 4, Physical Graffiti, Presence, or House of the Holy.
You worked with Korn.
Uh-huh.
How do you get the bass player's sound? His sound is so unusual.
Again, that's him. Just put a mic in front of it. That's it. He sounds that way. I remember at one point I was trying to get less click out of it, and I got called out for that. Like, you can't do that. Okay. We did have a gag going, I'll tell you this, and I'm not talking out of school here. We had a thing where Fieldy, the bass player, didn't know Nick's name.
Okay.
And by the way, when we're doing overdubs, Nick's doing a lot of that, or the engineer, and I'll come in and out, whatever. But bass players and guitar players don't really want a guitar player or bass player lording over them while they're doing it. They want to kind of want to help. Yeah. Nick said, "I don't think Fieldy knows my name." So we had a bet going as to how long he wouldn't know his name, and we had a thing where I couldn't come in and just say his name in front of him, and we had to. And I'm not sure he ever figured his name out. But he recorded all of his bits, and he could have been nicer than Nick and everything, but I don't think he ever knew his name.
Okay, so with these low tunings of this movement of bands like Korn, what are the challenges of recording, these really low tunings?
I never thought about it really.
Okay.
I never thought about it. Just make it sound good. They're still the same
principles.
Same principles. The singer was, I think Jonathan's an excellent singer. He was able to communicate what he was doing. He was very enthusiastic, down for anything.
Yep.
I really enjoyed working with him. I enjoyed working with James and Head a bunch. They had that part of their thing down. It was my job or anybody's job like that to try to make it sound as good as you can and to help translate it. That's just the job. And as a producer, I don't think my records have ever really had a sound. I think I've tried to do different people in their own way, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, these things that we've listened to have all sounded very different. You worked with Bruce Springsteen a lot.
Yeah.
You worked with AC/DC.
Yeah.
When you first worked with them, and you have all these records they had done in the past, is that strange?
The first time I worked with them in 2008, I guess.
Yeah.
And Malcolm was still there.
Yep.
But it was strange in that I did not meet those guys at all until the first day of recording. So I met them the first time, and it was just strange. First of all, when you meet somebody who you're so like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That's the same time when I first met Bruce Springsteen, and
right.
It takes you a minute you got to just kind of pull it together, and then you just got to pull it together. Like, oh, I got to do my job now. But there's a moment there you're like, oh, okay, But with the AC/DC guys, they're just sitting there and they have nothing to say. They're just smoking cigarettes, and so they play me these demos, and the demos are they're Angus's and Malcolm's demos.
Okay.
They're very crude. They have the parts. But I find that it's Angus kind of singing, kind of mumbling where the parts go. That's how he does his demos.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's kind of the melody here. So I figured out that this is how they do it. So we did a couple of songs to start with. I wasn't quite sure how to go from there, but we did a couple of things to start with. And by the first day, they up and running, and we had this sort of basic track of the song together. And arrangement together, and they were very attentive about it. They were very, what am I supposed to do here? And I had a little guitar out in the amp in the room. I would kind of, and they were very, just like anybody else. And we go back and play it back, and it's like, fuck, that sounds like AC/DC. I mean, it really, that's how they sound, unless you screw it up.
Yeah.
So it became apparent right away. Honestly, I just wanted everyone to hear that record. I think that one was called Black Ice. I just wanted their fans who hadn't heard them a long time or whatever to go, oh yeah, AC/DC, I love those guys. Not to go, this is the new AC/DC. It's like, I like AC/DC. I kept listening to Back in Black over and over.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of reverb here and there, and there's a little bit of this and that, and there's some tempos. And so I would just compare constantly what we're doing at Back in Black. How far away we from that sort of vibe. And
just them playing together sounds like AC/DC.
It sounds right. But I have heard records where it didn't sound like AC/DC, and it bothered me. And I'm really like, why is this, how hard can this be?
Brendan, how loud did those guys want to play in the studio, or did?
Everything is separated. It's all headphones.
Yeah, okay.
So they played like Marshall amp. I mean, these guys have Angus and Malcolm had the same Marshall amps. They've basically played. Now they have dozens of amps.
Yeah.
Probably hundreds of amps.
Yeah.
But they have the same Marshall heads and Marshall cabinets they've pretty much used probably for 50 years. Yeah, they had the same ones.
Would they be the same ones they toured with even?
No, I think they toured different amps maybe. They had to.
Yeah.
And they had a beautiful guy, he was a lovely guy, he's passed away since then, Jeff Banks. He was on the back of all the Genesis records. He was the Genesis roadie, they're their guy. And so when I was a kid, I would say, who's this? And I go, dude, you're on all my records. Like you're
amazing.
And he was just a really lovely guy, and but he took care of, those guys. But, once we started doing that, we put demos together for Brian, and we would kind of make it easier for him and sort of sing the versions of the songs as they're supposed to be for him to learn it, and then he wouldn't have to sing it 60 times. Yeah.
Okay, and Bruce Springsteen, when you first worked with Bruce, when you got the call that you're going to work with Bruce, did you have a meeting with them? How did that work?
That's one of those things where up to that time, there were like two artists where I'm like, these are who I want to work with. One was Bruce Springsteen, one was AC/DC.
Yeah.
Tom Petty was another I liked a lot, but Rick worked with Tom, and that wasn't going to happen. And I kept saying all along, I see Donnie Einer because he was on. Listen, how's your boy Bruce doing? Like Bruce is doing. He's got everything else. All he really needs is me. That's all he needs. And I would just like hassle him. It's just always funny. And at some point, he called me. He goes, okay, I've been talking to John Landau, and he's met with a few people and likes a couple things you've been doing. I think the Train record was a big hit at the time, and so you want to go meet with him, and he's got some stuff that he wants to do, and what do you think? I said, yeah. So I fly to New Jersey, and I go plane up there, and I'm getting off the little plane, and the pilot's go, dude, is that Bruce Springsteen? And I go, yeah, that's Bruce Springsteen. He's picking me up.
Picking you up, okay.
Hey man, how's it going? I'm like, okay. Yeah. Hey. So it kind of took most of that ride back to his house for me to kind of calm down a little bit, get into the mode. And the great thing is I'm pretty sure he knew that. So I think he's kind of used to that part of it. So, I just say, listen, this is great. I appreciate you seeing me. And, as you obviously know, I'm a huge fan. I saw this show, I saw that show, blah, 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 whatever. And we went back to his place, and I was going to stay one day, I ended up staying 2 days, and he played me some songs, did a couple demos, and he played me this one thing, and I said, this is good, but I don't think you need this part. This part's the main thing. You make this your center of it. Let's repeat that a couple times, and then we don't really need a bridge. And let's make a real quick demo doing that. So he played the demo, and I played bass, he sang it, and okay, cool. That's great. So I'm thinking, this is good. So he agreed to come to Atlanta, just do a couple of songs to see how it went. And keep in mind, at that time, again, it's a different game now, but at that time, I didn't audition for people. It's just,
Right.
Even when I was supposed to audition for people, in my own mind, I would tell people I'm not doing this. I always felt like that was a recipe for failure, you know? So I'm doing this, and if it goes badly, you can fire me. And my other thought was, there's often I get in the middle of a record, the first song or two we do, I mess it up, and we work so quickly we can fix it, you know?
Yeah.
But I remember talking to my team, my guys, my engineers, Nick, and the guys with Billy, and all the guys that were there, like, this has got to be great. This has got to go well. Clearly, this has to go well. So you know, we're all ready. And I remember telling Bruce, and he brought Max and Gary and Roy Bitton, just a 4-piece band down with him to track a couple of songs. I was telling those guys, you just bring whatever instrument you want. You don't have to do anything else. And everything was all set. Drums were set up, amps were set up, everything ready to go. They played a song, and they came back and it sounded great, and he was instantly happy. So I'm like, okay, my training has come into, because I remember when I first started engineering, assisting back in the day, they're saying, when the artist comes in, they hear it sounding good through the speakers, they have your confidence. So it was like, it's got to sound great the first time. And it's always been that way. After the record came out, that record was The Rising. I read the interview with Bruce, and they were asking about me, and he goes, yeah, he came up to Atlanta, it was great, and lovely guy. And I played the song for him, and he said, well, it's not quite right, let's try to fix it. And in my head, I'm going, of course it's right, it's my song. What are you talking about? I was pissed. And I'm like, holy shit, man, I didn't know that. And I talked to him later, I said, if I'd known that, that would have thrown me. I'd say the times that were great when he left, we did 2 or 3 songs that first little session. He went back, and this is the day of answering machines, and he left me a voicemail, like a great voicemail. Said, hey man, had a great time, loved it, can't wait to come back. Really had a blast. And that was the time I went, this is a good job.
Yeah.
I got a good job, so yeah.
One last thing, Brendan, working now, you work in Pro Tools, right?
Yes, I mean, technology has passed me by in many ways, but I have fantastic engineers. I have an engineer that I work with, Kyle Stevens, who does a great job, and a couple other guys who work with me, they're really good at it. I know how to point and say what I want, so impatiently.
Do you ever miss the old days of recording on tape?
No, I don't.
Everybody that I ask this that started on tape says the same thing.
I tell you what I miss. I do miss the good time. I mean, we had a blast. But, I look back and those times. I think any time that you're in a job or any kind of time, anything you're doing where you are around great people you like and you have moments. And the interesting thing about my job and the job making records or movies or whatever, you're constantly reminded of that time because those songs pop up.
Yeah.
And I always think about what was going on at that moment, and I miss that. That was, but that still happens today. I love working. It's a totally different way of working now. I've recorded drums twice in the last 3 years. It's just a different game right now.
I mean, is it hard to even imagine if you would have gone back to the mid 80s and imagine this future, the way that people record, that you can record on laptops and do all this stuff. Could you ever even have imagined that?
I was sort of always late to the party. I was one of the last in line when it came to technology, mainly because I was so focused on making sure it worked.
Yeah.
I can tell you, in my entire career of using tape machines, I had one go out once. Wow. One time. Studer makes great machines. And
that's right.
Ampex, they all make great machines. It just happened one time, and we were done for the day. There weren't 2 machines at wheel in at this point. We were done for the day. But when Pro Tools and stuff came out, it would fail 10 times a day.
Right.
At terrible times.
Slow tools. At the time.
So once that became a thing that became very reliable and then became the industry standard, I was on board, done. Never, I don't care. I had an artist about 10 years come in. They were young guys. They wanted to go tape. We want to do tape. We want to do tape. I'm like, okay, sure. And it took forever. They didn't understand that you have to wait for things to rewind.
Right.
And at that point, I went, you know what? I'm cool with not using tape. Now, when I did AC/DC, we did all the tracking on tape.
Okay.
The drum tracks, but that's what they wanted to do, and we did that. But once we got it on, we edited it and put it in Pro Tools. But I'm not romantic about that. I remember when tape was really going away, when it started really going away. This is like in the mid 2000s, when it was really starting to go away.
Yeah.
I had someone tell me, hey, listen, there's a group of people thinking about getting together to buy the Ampex factory and make tape. And we're looking for investors, but this just to kind of save it. And I'm like, you're talking to the wrong guy, man. I do not. Well, how much I said? I do not care. I don't care at all. Like everything else, we figured out ways to get stuff to sound tape compressed. We figured out ways to sound like saturation.
Brendan, it's been an honor to have you here. I know that you don't like doing these, and I'm super psyched that you came by today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right.
When you have a 3-hour interview with someone, sometimes you forget to ask questions. So I realized the next morning that I forgot to ask Brendan about mixing Superunknown and working with Audioslave. So I texted him. I said, Brendan, can we get on Zoom and talk about this? He's like, yeah, no problem. So this next section is actually talking about working with those two bands. For some reason, I left out a couple important things.
Okay.
Regarding, first of all, mixing Superunknown. And I'd like to ask you about, first of all, how you got involved with that record. And tell me about your experiences with it.
I got involved. I'm sure it was through, knowing the Pearl Jam guys, and things were heating up a little bit, so people kind of knew what I was doing a bit. I mixed a couple other records around that time. I mixed an Aerosmith record that was doing well, and most stuff I've mixed, so people were kind of knowing about that a little bit. But I think it was really mainly through the Pearl Jam guys, and I don't know if I was up there working anyway, but I don't think so. Maybe I just might have just gone up there while they were recording, and I met everybody the first time. I don't think I met Chris before or anybody, or Matt or anybody. They played me some stuff at the studio, and it sounded a little not crazy, but it was kind of like a big ball of sound, And I remember thinking, well, I think it sounds good. I just couldn't really tell, and they were playing it really loud, and so I was like, okay, sure. So then we went to, I think it was that trip. I think we all went to dinner to talk about the mixing process or whatever. And we all sat down. We nice, good guys and stuff, and we all sat down. It was us, and I think their manager at the time, Susan Silver, was there. And I just said, hey, I don't know what we're going to talk about. I mean, we just pull it up and make it sound good, and that's it. I don't know how to talk about it. I mean, we're kind of done now, right? I mean, we had just sat down, and it's like, okay, yeah,
that's it.
They were just shooting the shit for the next hour and a half. So that was kind of. I said, I don't, we're going to mix it. I don't, So I remember before they were still working on it, and I was back in Atlanta working on some stuff, and I called Chris at one point and just check on when they wanted me to come. I was supposed to come like the next week or something, and he said this is like probably noon, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon my time. And he said, yeah, we're comping a vocal. I'll call you when we're done. And I kind of forgot about it. About 6 or 7 o'clock that time, that might like way later. I said, I forgot to call him. So I call him. Hey, I forgot to call you back because he was like, no, we're still comping here. I said, dude, you can sing, right? You're like a good singer. What are you guys doing up there? I was just giving him shit. He was sort of laughing. I think he started realizing, he goes, I think we're kind of in the weeds a little bit, but we're getting it done. I don't know if everybody does this, but I sure do. I asked the assistant, what's the shortest song? What's the quickest? What's the easiest? What's done? And there was a song called, I think it was called Kickstand.
Oh, yeah.
And that song maybe 2.5 minutes long. And I pulled that up, and it sounded great. And it sounded great pretty fast. And I think I was finished mixing in 2 or 3 hours and kind of done, and everybody listened. That sounds great.
What about songs like Fell on Black Days? That has great tones on it, incredibly good tones on it. Now, was that an easy song to mix?
They were all fairly easy to mix. I mean, I do know when I got there, I was mixing the first thing, and I started seeing the other track sheets. And this is early in my sort of career, so I didn't know about stuff like, organizing other people's records and things. Like right. I grew up in the business organizing everything really spot on. And even right before this, I'd done a remix with Rick of a Queen song that it was whatever that was, it was fine. But we did have all the tapes there, had all the masters, the Queen masters there, and Rick and I, we just listened to a bunch of songs, and you could literally just kind of pull them up, and there were moves, but they kind of just worked. And I'm like, oh, it was just inspiring how those were so organized, and just on that level, like you didn't have to guess what was going to happen. You just had to make it sound great. So I remember asking the producer and the I don't know who, I said, you guys have to organize this for me. I can't. And the idea was, well, you just kind of make some choices here, choices there. These are not my choices to make, and we don't have that kind of time. And we're doing laundry for the next 3 weeks, if that's basically what we're doing here. I'm cleaning shit, whatever. But So he stayed a couple of days. I don't know that he was thrilled about that, but he was a pro about it. Did a great job. Put it all together, comped everything, organized it all. And so by the time we started mixing, it started going, pretty quickly. But like Fell on Like Black Days, that song just kind of sounded like that. You had kind of made some. I do remember early going into it, I remember thinking, that Matt's a really great drummer, and he's got a really great thing going on. And I really liked the album before, which was
Bad Motorfinger.
Yeah, Bad Motorfinger. Loved it. It was just so weird sounding. The drums are it's just weird, super weird. Like how does that happen? I honestly didn't know how they made it sound that way, which I kind of dig. That was a one-time thing. It felt like to me. I felt like it needed to sound more like him, and I felt like just making the drums or whatever the tracks sound more like what they sounded like. It was, it wasn't like a. Just, really there was pull the faders up, throw, get it balanced out and make some moves. And that was it.
Brendan, how long would it typically take you to mix a record? I know that we didn't really talk about that, but would you do 2 songs a day, 3 songs a day, 1 song a day?
if it were 2 songs a day, I'd always liked doing that. Now, what I figured out later in life, early on in life, I was somewhat militant about that. Like I was far like everybody, I was far more rigid when I shouldn't have been. Earlier on, when I know this is how I do it. I'm good at this. I can do this, and that confidence is always good. But you just can't be rigid. You got to let everybody come to things on their own in their own time. I figured out later that a lot of times artists need to listen to it, sit with it a minute, and then come back the next day and go, "Okay, this sounds great," or "I got 2 or 3 changes and we're done." So what I would do is I'd mix a song in the morning, and they'd come in and listen, and we'd be done with it, and mix a song in the afternoon, and by the evening we're done with it, and we're moving on. And they would sound great to me and everybody, but later on, invariably, there'd be little changes to be made because I didn't give people time all the time to make those changes early on. And they weren't dramatic changes. They were just, I need this up a little here, this a little bit, whatever. And now it's very easy to do that, but at that point it was harder because it's just
And
so
Brendan, what do you look for when you're mixing someone else's records? Do you organize it any differently than when you do your own record? Because you told me that you would be mixing as you go, kind of, so you know what it sounds like. But if you're mixing someone else's tracks,
I guess I would just kind of pull it up and see what we have, and if it all kind of played in some fashion once you balance it out without putting a bunch of stuff on it. Now, I have certain processes that I use for things and there was always sort of a layout that I would use.
Okay.
Vocals go here, drums go here, bass goes here. I'm used to seeing it that way. I would color code it all the same. I'm very big about, I was very big about color coding. I'm looking at a board right now that we're using they used to stretch out all the way across, and now we're using about this many of them. That's the different business. But I still color code all the files. I have to be. I can't tell what I'm doing otherwise. But I would start with things that I knew, the compressors that I liked, and whatever. But you'd have to kind of listen to the songs, listen to what they're doing, and see how that kind of worked. But generally, they're going to sound like what the records sound like. They're not going to sound like me. But I would use a lot of the same,
And Brendan, would you use individual compression on the bass drum, the snare drum, things like that, or typically would you do them in subgroups or VCAs?
All the above.
All the above, depending on what it needed, right?
I'll gang up 2 or 3 compressors on stuff sometimes. Not so much for the compression, but for the sound. It just changes the tone. Plugins are a little different. They do change the tone in a good way, but they do it differently. So you have to kind of know what that is.
Okay.
And, they've kind of got a lot of that shit figured out, man. Pretty good. It's pretty good.
Is it shocking to you, some of the things that how well things are emulated?
I don't think I'm shocked by it because technology you just got to, it's a little bit of an adapt or die mentality. You can stay like, oh, in my day, we would do this or whatever. Like, no, you just got to, it's the same with making records with different artists. I work with some new artists that are younger artists, and they work completely different than the way I learned how to work.
Right.
But you adapt to that because it's not my thing, it's their thing. So you kind of, same with mixing. So like on that record, that was a long time ago, everything literally came out of its own track because you had to kind of blend it. One of the things that made people do a lot, and I understand that, but like I don't need 3 microphones on a single guitar track. I just want just blend it where you're doing it and put it on one track and let's go.
Right.
What happens a lot of times is people will do that, especially in those days.
Yeah.
But you don't know what their blend was. You're trying to get this tone they had with their rough mix, and you're trying to blend. It's just it's a difficult thing to do sometimes.
And would you always go back and records that you mixed? Would you listen to the rough mix first? Would you have it up on the console or no?
Usually not.
Okay.
Usually not. Usually almost never. Unless there was a thing like I would ask them where do you like to hear this guy most of the time? Where do you like to hear this guy most of the time? And
like where they're panned, right?
Yeah. Like, is this guy going to be over here? And I think with the same thing like Soundgarden, they were like whatever, because they had their guitar stuff. Chris's and Kim's guitar stuff was very intertwined, and you just kind of put it where it sounded good. And I would kind of want to know what that is. But otherwise, I would try not to listen to the rough. Every now and then I listened to it for a reference, but, I didn't really need to hear it and didn't. So.
Brendan, would you use reverbs and things like that on guitars or room sounds or anything?
Sure, sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, sometimes.
And the other thing I want to ask you about is you worked with Rage Against the Machine and you worked with Audioslave.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference between working with the two bands?
There are some things that are obviously incredibly similar. The 3 guys are in both bands.
Yeah.
The rhythm section the commonality there would be is those 3 guys are really a one of a kind unit. They really, when they get their thing together, it is a thing, and I can't describe what it is other than when you hear it.
Right.
And I feel like early on I kind of figured out what that balance was supposed to be, and maybe they didn't always agree with that, and maybe everybody sort of came. They made a record before I came along, but once I started making records with them, we kind of came to a thing with the bass guitar, relationship and the drums, and we kind of carried a bit of that over to Audioslave, but it was a whole different kind of thing. But besides that, it was completely different. There was Rage Against the Machine was very driven by, they were very driven politically and very lyrically, and you got your hooks different ways. There was an energy that those 4 guys did, even when they weren't always in the same room, that was different than anything else. And Audioslave was more, obviously you had Chris singing, and it was a lot of the songs were a lot of his ideas and his songs. And I don't really know what the balance. Maybe there were more Tom's and Timmy's and Brad's. But that's another thing. I would really never ask who wrote what, because I didn't want to know. I wanted to just try to pick the best songs, and it didn't matter to me who wrote. If I have 3 songs, he has 6. That's not so much.
You don't want to
problem.
get involved in that.
Well, no, but I mean, inevitably, sometimes that would happen because we've been finished with a record and someone doesn't have a song on the record, and that's a thing.
That is a thing.
So we do what we could, but when it came to Audioslave, that's a much different thing. It's a different kind of approach to everything.
And what was it like to track Chris's vocals?
I mean, he was great at it. Before, when I worked with him, he had done his previous 3 or 4 records where I think he told me he had tracked a lot of his stuff himself. He was just sitting there and tracking it all himself. And I go, well, we can do that, but then why am I here? This is kind of my job. I can help you with this. And
right.
He was a little skeptical not skeptical, but he was very dry. He would let you know that it was super funny, and he would let you know whether he thinks, okay, all right, tough guy, whatever you say, that kind of thing. But as soon as we started working, I think he realized right away that I could do that with him, and he really took to it instantly.
Brendan, was he a loud singer, or was his high voice more like a distorted falsetto?
He would describe that to me a couple of times. I don't think he was particularly loud. No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody that sings that like that sings particularly loud when you're singing high and doing that thing. I think it's like I'd always heard. I never heard him, but I'd always heard James Brown had a very quiet, apparent voice.
Interesting.
One of the things also I try to do with the singers and with him and everybody is just tell them to work the mic. The showbiz, work the mic, man. When you're singing loud, back off. When you're singing quiet, move in. You don't want the equipment to do all the work. So really good singers who've made a couple of records learn that pretty quickly too.
And what would a vocal chain be for Chris Cornell?
It's pretty much the same for everybody. You find a mic that works. Sometimes you try a few things. again, with a good singer, they all sound good. So I mean,
Right.
that is really the truth. But it's just a matter of what you're looking for. It's very much the same with everybody I work with. You like maybe a Neve and an LA2A, or I have another rack that's a tube tech rack, which is and maybe a pull tech in there. So you have 2 or 3 things stacked up.
When you're tracking right now, would you have a similar
Same
chain?
thing.
Same thing.
Identical. As a matter of fact, I have a vocal chain. I bought a rig. It was a tube tech rig, which is a mic pre, tube mic pre, a mic, an EQ, which is like a Pultec, and the compressor. They're all just kind of stacked up. I've had that for 30 years, and I use that in my room. I'm not in my room now, but in my room I use that, and we use a very similar thing here. And maybe it might be a Neve preamp here.
Do you like mixing in the box? Are there advantages that you think when you think to yourself, man, God, this is so much easier in some ways?
It's always easier when you're finished and you got to go back and fix something.
Right.
There's nothing even, and that's how people expect to work now.
Right.
The days of just, we're done mixing. We're done. That's it. That's not the way it is now. People expect, because
micro mixing.
Well, no, it's not even really that. They expect that 2 or 3 days later or a week later, they go, hey, man, before we master, can you just bring up the left side of this a little bit, whatever? No problem. The answer is always, whether it was then or now, the answer is sure, of course. It's just doing it now. It's just like, you go in and it's a 15-minute thing. And then it was like, fuck. But you got to do it. The idea of not being able to grab knobs while I'm mixing sucks. I miss that part of it. Even when I mix now, I have a newer SSL board that's it's all zeroed out. I forget what it's called. It's a new thing. It sounds like the old Eve Origin. Yeah. And there's no automation, no nothing, but all the channels really do sound like E channels, and the center section really does sound like pretty damn close to an E console. But the great thing about it is that you turn it on, it works. It comes right on, and it does have all these buttons on it that zeroes everything out, where you can just do all the internal mixing and automation with the middle section to get the sounds you want. Like I'd put them out in pairs. I really do think, for me, I know people do it all kinds of ways, and they're all right. But for me, I do think having stuff laid out in like a summing situation through a master it makes a difference.
Okay, a couple other things. What is your typical bus compressor? If you use the bus compressor on an SSL, do you use 4-to-1 ratio?
I'll tell you right now. It's, they're all kind of noon. That's right. That's how I always feel like everything kind of starts at noon. That's how you start all these things, and then you turn the makeup up and down. The threshold has changed based on what you're doing. I can never remember, but I know that the TAC's pretty, I don't know, 0.1. The release is at noon. The ratio's at noon. I know if you put a higher ratio, I do know that, it'll hit, it may hit, you may sound harder, but it'll hit less.
Interesting.
I don't know why.
And what's the most gain reduction that you'll use on a master on the master bus?
I'd like to see it moving, popping a little bit. The great thing that the newer compressors have that this one didn't have, this is an older SSL, high pass filter. Because I would always have trouble with, you want the kick or the low end nice and loud, and that would just kind of, if it hits something, it just sucks everything down. So you have to be very careful of that with the high pass filter and all the inboard compressors. And I know someone's going to tell me, oh, you could do it this way and do it that way. And whatever. Listen, I just know it's sitting there. And this is an older board, or like the older ones, I would just kind of have to watch that. It also kind of helped you kind of keep everything kind of balanced a bit. But having the high pass filter is a big thing. So you can kind of cut some of the low end out of the compressor.
Since you started early on, how much would you use metering as far as when you're setting up your mix, for example, as you're starting to get it together? Is there some place that you say, oh, well, if I got the drums up, I need to be at minus this, or, would you use metering very much?
No, I'm sure I do. I can't really, I don't know the specifics. I know that if you get it all sounding great and your meter is doing this, you got to pull it back a bit and just, pull it back to where everything's, again, around noon. It's kind of living there. I like it all hitting hard, even when it hits to the digital thing, whatever. In my head, I could be wrong about this, but in my mind, if it fills up most of the meter, that's better. I don't know if that makes any difference at all.
More is more.
I'm sure it's better. How can it not be better?
How can it not be better?
Yeah. But I'm sure there is Anyway, but the difference is if you hit clip into digital stuff,
That's bad.
then that's a problem.
Yeah.
And it sounds bad. I do remember when I first started mixing, and I was I didn't know any better. I'd start kind of going, and I get the mix going, and I have it built, and the song would build in, and I would realize as I'm mixing this crushing. So I'd literally, as we're mixing, have to kind of mess with the 2-mix fader, and and like that's. I remember thinking, this is definitely not how you do this. This is not the right, probably not the right way to do this. But we're almost done. I gotta go. So.
Brendan, thank you. I couldn't leave those two artists. Couldn't leave without touching on those.
I should have said also that those were mixing that record was a great time with Soundgarden. That was just a fun. I had a blast. We had a great time. And I haven't seen Kim or Ben, really much at all because I haven't worked with Soundgarden in that long. But I would see Matt, work with Matt and Chris over the years, and they became friends and good friends and great guys and great players, and it was great.
Cool. I'd like to once again thank Brendan for being my guest today. This was really a fun experience for me getting to ask him all these questions. Maybe I'll have him back on the channel again in the future. Hit subscribe, leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching.